Standing by the champagne tower, I froze when my brother's fiancée leaned in. She whispered that I should stay out of the frame because I was ruining the vibe. She had no idea I just signed the papers to buy the building where her entire family swipes their badges every morning. She did not realize I had heard enough to dismantle her engagement and her career in less than 3 days. My name is Alyssa Stone, and if there is one thing 32 years of life have taught me, it is that the loudest person in the room is rarely the one holding the keys. I stood near the entrance of the Marlowe Conservatory, a breathtaking garden loft venue in the heart of Chicago, trying to make myself as small as possible against a wall covered in ivy. The space was a masterpiece of industrial elegance, featuring exposed brick, soaring glass ceilings, and enough exotic flora to mimic a rainforest. It was the kind of place people booked 2 years in advance, desperate to prove their social standing with a single evening of overpriced hors d'oeuvres and mood lighting. I knew exactly how much the lighting cost. I knew the hourly rate of the string quartet playing in the corner. I knew the specific clause in the rental agreement that prohibited red wine on the white marble terrace. I knew these things because my signature was at the bottom of the deed to the building. But nobody here knew that. To the 200 guests swirling around me in silk and tailored wool, I was just Evan Stone's sister, the one who looked like she had just sprinted from a subway station, which, to be fair to their judgment, was not entirely inaccurate. My appearance was a calculated casualty of my profession. 2 hours ago, a main water line had burst in one of my older residential properties in Edgewater. It was a crisis that required immediate decision-making, a pair of heavy boots, and a complete disregard for my own comfort. I had spent the afternoon wading through ankle-deep water, calming down panicked tenants, and coordinating with emergency plumbers who charged triple rates for weekend calls. By the time the water was shut off and the damage assessment was underway, I had exactly 45 minutes to cross the city during rush hour traffic. There had been no time for a blowout. There had been no time to change into the floor-length navy gown hanging in my closet. I had scrubbed the grime off my hands in a gas station bathroom, smoothed down my frizz as best as I could, and arrived wearing a pair of practical black trousers and a plain gray blouse that screamed mid-level administrative assistant. I looked out of place. I knew it. And worse, I knew that everyone else knew it. My parents were holding court near the center of the room, looking radiant. My father was laughing at a joke he likely did not understand, and my mother was clutching a crystal flute of champagne, her eyes scanning the room for validation. They were good people, mostly, but they were people who believed that success was something you wore, not something you did. When I had walked in 10 minutes ago, my mother's smile had faltered for a fraction of a second. She had pulled me into a hug that was less about affection and more about shielding my outfit from the view of her friends. "Oh, Alyssa," she had whispered, her voice tight. "You didn't have time to stop home. It is your brother's big night. Work emergency, Mom," I had replied, keeping my voice low. I didn't want to miss the toast. She had sighed, the sound of a woman perpetually disappointed by her daughter's lack of glamour. "Well, just try to stay near the back. Honey, we want everything to be perfect for Evan." I respected that. I loved Evan. He was the golden boy, the one who followed the rules, got the corporate job, and was now marrying the woman of his dreams. I would stay in the back. I would eat a canapé, smile at the appropriate times, and disappear before the dancing started. That was the plan. Then I saw Brielle. Brielle Whittaker was undeniably beautiful. She was wearing a custom cream-colored gown that likely cost more than my first car. Her hair was a cascading waterfall of blonde waves, perfectly pinned to frame a face that was currently beaming with practiced joy. She was the center of gravity in the room, pulling everyone toward her with a gravitational force made of charisma and ambition. She held Evan's hand as if he were a prop she had won at an auction, a shiny accessory that completed her look. I watched them from my spot by the catering table. Evan looked happy. He looked besotted. That was all that mattered. I told myself. I took a sip of ice water, my stomach growling. I had not eaten since breakfast. Brielle's eyes swept the room, checking the angles, checking the guests, checking the lighting. Her gaze landed on me. The smile did not drop, which was almost more terrifying. It stayed fixed on her face, but her eyes went cold. She said something to Evan, patted his chest, and began to glide toward me. It was a predatory walk, smooth and direct. "Alyssa," she exclaimed as she got close, her voice pitching up an octave to simulate warmth. She leaned in for a hug, but her body barely touched mine, as if she were afraid my mediocrity might be contagious. "I am so glad you made it. We were worried you wouldn't show up. I wouldn't miss it." "Brielle," I said, pulling back, "congratulations. The place looks amazing." She smirked, a tiny, tight movement of her lips. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. To anyone watching from 10 feet away, it looked like a sister-in-law sharing a tender moment. "It is amazing, isn't it?" she purred. Then, her voice dropped to a whisper that was sharp enough to cut glass. "Listen, Alyssa, the photographer is doing rounds right now. Do me a favor and try to stay out of the main frames. Okay, no offense, but you look like you just came from a shift at a diner. You are ruining the vibe." The words hit me in the chest like a physical shove. I blinked, processing the audacity. "You are ruining the vibe." I looked at her. I looked at the diamond on her finger, a ring my brother had taken out a loan to buy. I looked at the venue she was standing in, a venue I had purchased 6 months ago through a shell company to diversify my portfolio. "Excuse me," I asked, my voice calm but hard. Brielle laughed, a tinkling sound that masked the venom. She reached out and brushed a stray hair from my shoulder, a gesture that was patronizing in the extreme. "Oh, don't be sensitive. I just want everything to be elegant. Look at you. You look like a waitress who got lost on her way to the kitchen. Just mingle in the shadows." "Okay, for Evan." She pulled back, her smile returning to its full, blinding wattage. "Thanks for understanding, sweetie." She turned on her heel and floated back toward the center of the room. I stood there, my hand gripping my water glass so hard I thought it might shatter. The heat rose in my neck. The urge to cause a scene was overwhelming. I could stop the music. I could walk to the microphone. I could announce to the entire room that without my signature on the venue authorization form this morning, the doors would have remained locked. I could tell her that the waitress she just insulted could buy and sell her entire family's assets without breaking a sweat. But then I saw Evan. He was laughing at something his future father-in-law was saying. He looked at peace. He looked proud. If I exploded now, I would not just be hurting Brielle. I would be humiliating my brother. I would be the bitter, underdressed sister who made the engagement party about herself. I would prove them right. I exhaled slowly, forcing my pulse to slow down. Not tonight, I told myself. Play the long game. Always play the long game. I needed air. The scent of expensive lilies and heavy perfume was suddenly suffocating. I placed my water glass on a passing tray and slipped out the side doors into the corridor that led to the restrooms and the administrative offices. The hallway was quiet, lined with tasteful black and white photographs of old Chicago. I leaned against the cool plaster wall and closed my eyes, counting backward from 10, 10, 9, 8. Voices drifted from around the corner. I opened my eyes. A group of 3 women, Brielle's bridesmaids, were standing near the large mirror in the hallway, touching up their lipstick. They did not see me in the shadows of the alcove. "Did you see Evan's sister?" one of them asked, giggling. "What was she wearing? It looked like she bought it at a discount supermarket." "I know," another voice replied. "It was Brielle. She must have followed them out for a moment of respite." I told her to hide. Honestly, it is embarrassing. Evan is great, but his family is so pedestrian, except for the parents. They try. But the sister, hopeless. At least the venue is perfect. The third friend said, "How did you guys afford this place? I heard the Marlowe has a waiting list of 2 years and a minimum spend of $50,000. My ears perked up. I stayed perfectly still. "Oh, you know me," Brielle's voice bragged, dripping with self-satisfaction. "My dad knows people. We have connections in high places in the real estate world. We pulled some strings. This place is usually impossible to get. But when you know the people who actually run the city, doors open, We practically got it for a steal because they wanted to impress us. I almost laughed out loud. The audacity was breathtaking. Her father, a mid-level manager at a logistics firm, did not know a soul in commercial real estate. The reason they got the booking was because I had seen Evan's name on the tentative inquiry list 3 months ago and had told the booking manager to clear the date and apply the family and friends discount code. Anonymously. I had saved them nearly $15,000 and bumped a corporate retreat to make this happen. Connections matter. Brielle continued, her voice echoing in the hallway. That is why I told Evan we have to upgrade his circle. You cannot fly with eagles if you are hanging out with turkeys. And his sister God. Poor people always ruin the vibe. They just carry this smell of desperation. You know, poor people always ruin the vibe. The sentence hung in the air, heavy and ugly. It was not just an insult. It was a worldview. It was a declaration of how she saw the world divided into those who mattered and those who were trash. And she had placed me firmly in the bin. I felt a coldness settle in my chest. It was not anger anymore. Anger is hot and messy. This was clarity. It was the same feeling I got right before I executed a hostile takeover of a failing asset. It was the feeling of knowing exactly where the structural weaknesses were and exactly how much pressure it would take to bring the whole thing down. The girls finished their makeup and headed back toward the party, their laughter trailing behind them. I waited a full minute before I pushed off the wall. I straightened my pedestrian gray blouse. I smoothed my hair. I was about to turn back to the party when the door to the administrative office at the end of the hall opened. A man in a sharp black suit stepped out, holding a tablet and a thick manila envelope. It was Marcus Henderson, the general manager of the Marlowe Conservatory. He looked stressed, his eyes scanning a document on the screen, until he looked up and saw me. His face instantly transformed from harried manager to deferential employee. "Ms. Stone," he exclaimed, hurrying toward me. "I had no idea you were on site tonight. I saw the name Stone on the booking for the event, but I assumed it was a coincidence." He stopped in front of me, looking slightly panicked. "Is everything to your liking? Is the staff performing up to standard if there is any issue with the catering?" Everything is fine." "Marcus," I said, my voice calm, "I am just here as a guest tonight. It is my brother's engagement." "Your brother?" Marcus's eyes widened. "Oh, wonderful, congratulations. That explains the priority booking flag in the system. I should have made the connection." He tapped the manila envelope in his hand. "Actually, since you are here, this might save us a courier fee. The legal team sent over the finalized contract for the second-floor renovation. The expansion into the adjacent warehouse. We need your final signature on the budget approval. It is the $2 million capital expenditure we discussed last week." I looked at the envelope. I looked at Marcus. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Brielle had come back. She was standing at the entrance of the hallway, frozen. She had likely come back to check her reflection one last time. She was staring at Marcus, whom she recognized as the man running the entire venue, and she was staring at me. She watched as Marcus, a man she claimed to have connections with, bowed his head slightly to the woman she had just called a waitress. "Ms. Stone," Marcus continued, oblivious to the audience. "Do you want to review this in the office? Or should I have it sent to your headquarters on Monday? I know you prefer not to discuss business at social events." Brielle's mouth opened slightly. The color drained from her face in a single, violent wash. She looked from the envelope to my face, her mind trying to process the impossible arithmetic. The waitress was being asked to approve a $2 million renovation budget. The help was being treated like the owner. I met Brielle's gaze. I saw the confusion, the sudden spike of fear. She waited for me to explain. She waited for me to tell Marcus he was mistaken. I did not. I turned back to Marcus and smiled. A professional, detached smile. "Monday is fine. Marcus, send it to my office at Stone Harbor Holdings, and make sure the crew knows not to start drilling before 8 in the morning. I don't want the residential tenants next door complaining." "Of course. Ms. Stone?" "Absolutely. Enjoy your evening." Marcus nodded respectfully and retreated back into his office. Silence stretched in the hallway. just me and Brielle. She took a step forward, her voice trembling. Alyssa, what was that? I could have ended it right there. I could have told her everything. I could have told her that I owned the building she was standing in, that I owned the building where she worked, that I owned the debt her father was drowning in. I could have crushed her like a bug, but the night was young, and revenge, I realized, was not a fast food meal to be eaten in a hallway. It was a 10-course banquet, and we hadn't even served the appetizers yet. I adjusted my cuff, looking her up and down with the same cool detachment she had used on me. Just a friend from high places. Brielle, I said softly, you know how it is. Connections matter. I didn't wait for her response. I walked past her, brushing my shoulder against hers, and headed back into the party. As I stepped into the light and the noise of the celebration, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The music sounded sharper. The champagne looked colder. They thought I was the dirt on their shoes. They thought I was a prop in their perfect picture. I took a glass of water from a passing waiter and raised it to my reflection in the glass window. Let them laugh. I thought, let them enjoy the vibe, because tomorrow, the rent comes due, and I am the one collecting. People often mistake silence for weakness. They see a woman standing quietly in a corner while someone insults her, and they assume she is afraid. They assume she has no ammunition. But the truth is, when you have spent 13 years building a fortress brick by bloody brick, you do not feel the need to throw stones at glass houses. You just wait for the wind to blow. To understand why Brielle's comment about me looking like a waitress did not make me cry. You have to understand that being a waitress was the only reason I was standing in that ballroom at all. It was the only reason I owned the shoes on my feet, the car in the parking lot, and the diversified portfolio that Brielle's family could only dream of. My education did not begin in a lecture hall. It began in a dusty, sun-bleached one-bedroom apartment in Edgewater when I was 19 years old. My great-aunt Meredith had passed away quietly in her sleep, leaving behind a collection of porcelain cats, a terrifying amount of floral wallpaper, and a property deed with my name on it. It was not a mansion. It was a third-floor walk-up in a building that had seen better decades, let alone better days. The paint was peeling in sheets like sunburned skin. The plumbing groaned like a dying animal every time you turned on the tap, and there was a lien on the unit for $3,000 in unpaid homeowner association fees. My family's reaction was immediate and pragmatic. Sell it, my father had said. Sitting at the kitchen table with a calculator, the market is down. But you could probably get $60,000 for it as is. Pay off the fees, pay the closing costs, and you have tuition for 2 years. Focus on your degree. Don't burden yourself with a money pit. My mother had agreed, looking at the photos of the stained carpet with wrinkled nose. Alyssa, you are 19. You do not know how to manage a property. Just take the cash and buy yourself a nice wardrobe for internships. Even Evan, who was already on the fast track to corporate success, had laughed. It is a dump. Lease. Unload it. They saw a burden. I saw a door. I looked at the numbers. If I sold it, I would have money for a little while, and then it would be gone. I would be back to zero, asking my parents for allowance, waiting for a salary that might never come. But if I kept it, if I fixed it, the average rent for a one-bedroom in that zip code was $900 a month. That was $10,800 a year, every year, forever. It was not a lottery ticket. It was a machine, and I decided I was going to learn how to operate it. I told my parents I was keeping it. They told me I was stubborn and naive. They told me they would not give me a dime to help with the repairs. They thought that would stop me. They thought the threat of financial isolation would force me to sell. Instead, it just made me angry. And anger is a phenomenal source of fuel. For the next 2 years, I did not have a life. I had a schedule. I woke up at 5 in the morning to work a shift at a coffee shop near campus until noon. I went to classes until 4. Then, from 5 in the afternoon until midnight, I worked as a waitress at a 24-hour diner on the north side. It was a place that smelled permanently of bacon grease and stale coffee, where the customers were either drunk, heartbroken, or long-haul truckers. I learned more about human nature in that diner than I ever did in my psychology electives. I learned that people treat you differently when you are wearing an apron. I learned that a smile can be a shield. And I learned that every singed dollar bill represented a unit of my life that I had traded away. So I better not waste it. I saved everything. I ate leftovers from the diner kitchen. I bought clothes at thrift stores. I walked instead of taking the bus if it was less than 2 miles. Every Friday, I took my cash tips to the bank and deposited them into a separate account I had named the Fund. My weekends were not spent at frat parties or football games. They were spent in Edgewater, breathing in drywall dust and paint fumes. I could not afford a contractor, so I became one. I watched thousands of hours of videos on the internet. I learned how to sand hardwood floors until my shoulders felt like they were on fire. I learned that cheap paint requires 3 coats, while expensive paint only takes 1. So being cheap actually costs you more time. I learned how to caulk a bathtub without making a mess, how to replace a P-trap under a sink, and how to change a light fixture without electrocuting myself. There were days I sat on the floor of that empty apartment and cried. I remember one Saturday in particular. I was trying to install a new toilet because the old one was cracked. I had been wrestling with the wax ring for 2 hours. My hands were covered in grime, and I had just smashed my thumb with a wrench. It was 90 degrees in the apartment because I refused to turn on the air conditioning to save electricity. I sat there, sweating and bleeding, listening to the sound of my friends posting photos of their beach trip on social media, and I felt a crushing weight of doubt. My father was right. I thought, I am just a girl playing house. I am going to fail. But then I looked at the wall I had just painted. It was a soft, dove gray. It looked clean. It looked professional. I had done that. Me. With my own 2 hands. I stood up, wrapped my thumb in a paper towel and duct tape, and finished installing the toilet. By the time I was 21, the apartment was ready. I listed it for rent, terrified that no one would call. But the phone rang. A young couple, grad students, came to look at it. They loved the restored floors. They loved the light. They signed a lease for $950 a month. When that first rent check hit my hand, it felt heavier than paper. It felt like freedom. But the real turning point, the moment that separated me from just being a landlady, happened a year later. The grad students moved out, and I rented the place to a man named Mr. Clark. He was quiet, older, always wore a suit, and paid his rent 3 days early every single month. One afternoon, I was over there fixing a loose cabinet hinge. I was sitting on the kitchen floor with my screwdriver, and he was making tea. He watched me work for a moment, then asked a question that changed my life. "Alyssa," he said, "who do I write the check to next month? You personally?" "Yes," I said, not looking up. "Just make it out to Alyssa Stone." He hummed, a low sound of disapproval. "You know," he said, "I am a real estate attorney, and watching you accept personal liability for a rental property is giving me an ulcer." I stopped turning the screw. I looked up at him. "What do you mean?" He sat down at the small kitchen table and gestured for me to join him. For the next 2 hours, he did not talk down to me. He did not treat me like a kid. He treated me like a client. He explained that if a tenant slipped in the shower and sued me, they could come after everything I owned: my car, my savings, my future wages. He explained that by mixing my rental income with my personal bank account, I was missing out on thousands of dollars in tax deductions. He drew diagrams on a napkin, showing me how the wealthy protect their assets. "You need an LLC," he told me sternly. "You need to treat this like a business, not a hobby. A hobby costs you money. A business makes you money and protects you while doing it." That night, I went home and did not sleep. I read everything I could find on limited liability companies. I read about depreciation schedules. I read about operating expenses and capital expenditures. The next week, I filed the paperwork. Stone Harbor Holdings was born. It was just a name on a piece of paper, representing one tiny apartment in Edgewater. But to me, it was an empire in the waiting. From that day forward, my mindset shifted. I stopped looking at the rent money as extra cash to buy shoes. I looked at it as revenue. I learned to create spreadsheets that tracked every penny. I learned that a $300 repair wasn't a loss. It was a tax-deductible maintenance expense. I learned to negotiate with plumbers, not as a desperate girl, but as a property manager with a list of vendors. I remember the first time I had a dispute with a contractor. He had tried to overcharge me for a water heater installation, thinking I wouldn't know the market rate for the unit. "Look, sweetheart," he had said, leaning against his truck. "Copper prices are up. That is the price." The old Alyssa, the waitress Alyssa, might have apologized and paid it, but the owner of Stone Harbor Holdings did not flinch. I pulled up 3 comparable quotes on my phone and showed him the wholesale price of the unit at the supply house. "The price is $600 for the unit and $300 for labor." I told him, my voice steady, "Or you can pack up your tools and I will call the guy on the next line of my list." He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. Then he nodded. "You are tough," he muttered. "All right, 900. That victory tasted better than any champagne I had ever drunk. My family still did not get it. They saw me working weekends and assumed I was struggling. They saw me driving an old Honda and assumed I was broke. When I told them I was buying a second property, a duplex in a transitional neighborhood, using the equity from the first one, my mother panicked. "You are going into debt," she gasped. "Alyssa, why can't you just get a normal job like Evan? He has a 401k. He has benefits. I have benefits too." I wanted to say, I have the benefit of never having to ask a boss for permission to go on vacation. I have the benefit of building something that will pay me while I sleep. But I didn't say it. I realized then that we were speaking different languages. They spoke the language of wages, where you trade time for money. I was learning the language of assets, where money works for you. So I stopped talking about it. I became the quiet one at family dinners. I let them brag about Evan's promotions and his corner office. I nodded when they asked if I was still doing that rental thing. I let them believe what they wanted to believe. It was lonely. I won't lie. There were Friday nights when I sat in my home office, which was just a desk in the corner of my bedroom, staring at spreadsheets while my friends were out at bars. There were times I wanted to scream, to show them my bank balance, to show them that my net worth was triple what they thought it was. But I learned that the loudest power is silent. Brielle and her family. They were loud. They wore their money on their wrists and drove it in their driveways. They needed everyone to know they had made it. That was their weakness. They needed the audience. I didn't need an audience. I needed equity. By the time I was 25, I had 4 units. By 28, I had bought my first commercial mixed-use building. I learned how to read a commercial lease agreement better than I could read a novel. I learned that residential tenants want a home, but commercial tenants want a partner. I learned that if you treat people with respect, if you fix the heat when it breaks and look them in the eye, they will stay with you for years. I also learned that the world is full of people like Brielle, people who judge a book by its cover because they have never bothered to read a page in their lives. So standing there at the engagement party, listening to her call me poor, listening to her mock the very foundation I had built my life on, I didn't feel hurt. I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. She was just like that contractor who tried to overcharge me for the water heater. She was underestimating the person standing in front of her. She looked at my simple clothes and saw a victim. She didn't see the woman who had scrubbed toilets, argued with city inspectors, and negotiated 6-figure contracts before breakfast. She didn't know that the gap between us wasn't money. She had access to money, or at least her parents did. The gap was knowledge. The gap was the thousands of hours of unglamorous, back-breaking, ego-checking work I had put in while she was busy curating her Instagram feed. I had the key to the building in my pocket, but more importantly, I had the key to the system. And that was something she could never take away from me, no matter how many times she tried to push me out of the frame. The transition from being a landlord to being a real estate investor is not just about the number of keys on your key ring. It is a fundamental shift in psychology. When you own a couple of apartments, you are worried about leaky faucets and late rent checks. When you step into the world of commercial equity, you stop worrying about the hardware and start worrying about the data. 3 years after I bought that first unit in Edgewater, my life looked deceptively similar on the outside, but had completely transformed on the inside. I still drove the same reliable sedan. I still lived in a modest apartment, though it was one I owned outright, but my mind was no longer occupied with sandpaper and paint swatches. It was occupied with cap rates, debt service coverage ratios, and the complex architecture of liability. I had stabilized my first 2 residential properties to the point where they ran themselves. The cash flow was consistent, a steady rhythm that beat in the background of my life like a second heart. But I knew that residential rentals had a ceiling, to build the kind of security that no one could ever take away from me, the kind of security that would make me bulletproof against the judgment of people like my brother's future in-laws. I needed to scale. That was when I found the building on the corner of 4th and Main in a developing neighborhood just north of the city center. It was a mixed-use property, which means it was a hybrid beast. The ground floor was commercial retail space, and the 2 floors above it were residential apartments. Most amateur investors run screaming from mixed-use buildings. They are terrified of commercial leases. They are scared of zoning laws. They are intimidated by the fire code requirements. I looked at that building and I did not see fear. I saw leverage. To acquire it, I could not just be Alyssa Stone, the girl who fixed her own toilets. I needed a corporate identity. I sat down with my lawyer, the same Mr. Clark who had mentored me years prior, and we structured Stone Harbor Holdings. It was a boring name by design. I wanted it to sound like a firm that had existed for 50 years, a faceless entity that filed paperwork on time and never made headlines. Stone Harbor Holdings became the legal owner of my assets, and I became its sole employee and director. The negotiation for that building was my baptism by fire. The seller was a tired old man who wanted to retire to Florida, but the bank financing the deal was a shark tank. I spent weeks arguing over interest rates. I remember sitting in a glass-walled office with a loan officer who tried to tack on a 0.5% premium because he considered the neighborhood high risk. I did not get angry. I opened my binder. I showed him the city's urban development plan for the next 5 years. I showed him the traffic count data for that intersection. I showed him the projected yield based on current market rents, not the outdated ones the current owner was charging. I watched the loan officer blink. He realized I had done more due diligence on the property than his own risk assessment team. I got the rate I wanted, but the real lesson came 3 months after closing. The tenant on the ground floor was a boutique marketing agency. They had trendy furniture, an espresso machine that cost more than my car, and a CEO who drove a Porsche. They looked successful. They were also 3 months behind on rent. The old Alyssa might have felt bad for them. The old Alyssa might have listened to their sob stories about cash flow timing and big contracts coming in next week. But Stone Harbor Holdings did not have feelings. It had a balance sheet. I dug into their business model, not because I wanted to run it, but because a landlord needs to know if their tenant is viable. I realized they were bleeding money on overhead and had no client retention strategy. They were a sinking ship, and they were threatening to pull my building down with them. I had to make a choice. I could be nice, or I could be solvent. I evicted them. It was a cold process. I followed the law to the letter. I served the notices. I locked the doors. When they left, the space was empty, and I was losing $4,000 a month in potential revenue. It was terrifying. But instead of panicking, I pivoted. I realized that the neighborhood didn't need another trendy marketing firm. It needed services. I courted a boring, unsexy tenant, a dental practice group. They didn't have a cool espresso machine. They had 5-year contracts, insurance backing, and a business model that never goes out of style because people always have teeth. When the dentist signed a 10-year lease, the value of my building jumped by 20% overnight. That is the magic of commercial real estate. The value is not just in the bricks, it is in the quality of the income stream. This success put me on the radar. Not the public radar, I stayed aggressively private, but the radar of local investment circles. I started getting invited to coffee by serious people. Men and women who managed family trusts, who developed strip malls, who understood that wealth is quiet. It was through one of these coffee meetings that I heard about Larkwell Strategies Group. Larkwell was a mid-sized management consulting firm. They were prestigious, respected, and profitable, but they had a problem. The original founders were aging out and wanted to liquidate their assets, but the younger partners didn't have the capital to buy them out fully. The company was trapped in a liquidity crisis. They owned their own headquarters, a beautiful 4-story brick building in the Loop, but the mortgage was eating them alive because it was structured poorly years ago. I saw an opening that no one else saw. I approached the remaining partners with a proposal that was complex but life-saving. Stone Harbor Holdings would purchase the building from them, injecting a massive amount of immediate cash into the company. This would allow them to pay off the retiring founders. Then, I would lease the building back to them at a fair market rate. But there was a second part to the deal, a part I kept very quiet. I used a separate trust to purchase a significant equity stake in Larkwell Strategies Group itself. I essentially became their landlord and their partner simultaneously. The negotiation for the Larkwell deal took 4 months. It was grueling. I remember sitting in a boardroom that smelled of lemon polish and stale fear. The partners were skeptical. They looked at me, a woman in her late 20s wearing a simple suit, and they wondered where the money was coming from. They didn't know I had leveraged every single asset I owned and secured a line of credit that made my stomach churn every time I looked at it. I bet the farm on Larkwell. I believed in their business. I just didn't believe in their real estate management. When the papers were finally signed, I owned 30% of the operating company and 100% of the building. I made one condition very clear: I was to be a silent partner. I did not want a seat on the daily executive committee. I did not want my name on the website. I did not want a company email address that clients could find. I wanted to be a ghost. My reasoning was simple. I valued my anonymity. I liked being able to walk into a grocery store without anyone knowing my net worth. I liked that my family treated me normally, even if normally meant with a side of condescension. If I had announced I was a major shareholder of a multi-million-dollar consulting firm, the dynamic would have shifted. People start asking for loans. People start treating you like a bank. However, being silent did not mean being passive. I attended the quarterly board meetings, usually via conference call or sitting quietly in the back. I reviewed every financial statement, and I instituted one non-negotiable cultural shift. During my time as a waitress, and later while cleaning up my own rental properties, I had been on the receiving end of the invisible class war. I knew what it felt like to have someone look through you because you were holding a mop. I knew the sting of a manager talking about you as if you were furniture. So, I forced a clause into the company handbook at Larkwell. We called it the Service Respect Protocol. It sounded bureaucratic, but it was personal. It stated that any disrespect shown to support staff janitors, receptionists, security guards, delivery drivers was grounds for immediate disciplinary action, up to and including termination. The other partners thought it was a quaint, eccentric request from their mysterious investor. They humored me. They didn't understand that I was building a safety net for the version of myself that used to scrub floors. Over the next 2 years, I quietly increased my stake. When a partner wanted to retire early, I bought his shares. When the company had a record year, I reinvested my dividends back into equity. By the time my brother Evan met Brielle, I controlled nearly 45% of the voting stock of Larkwell Strategies Group. But to the world, and to my family, I was just Alyssa who worked in property management. It wasn't a lie. I did manage property. I just happened to own the property I managed. My family's lack of interest was almost impressive. At Thanksgiving dinners, my father would ask Evan about his marketing campaigns in great detail. Then he would turn to me and ask, "So, the tenants are behaving, no broken windows." "Everything is fine, Dad," I would say, "just keeping the lights on." I didn't tell them about the acquisition of the Larkwell building. I didn't tell them that I had just negotiated a new insurance contract that saved the company $50,000 a year. I didn't tell them that I had fired a VP of sales because he screamed at a parking attendant. I didn't hide it because I was ashamed. I hid it because they never created the space for me to tell them. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes with success that nobody sees. You want to share the wins. You want to say, "Hey, I just closed a deal that is bigger than anything anyone in this room has ever done." But you know that if you say it unprompted, you sound arrogant. You sound like you are begging for approval. So I learned to keep my mouth shut. I learned to find satisfaction in the numbers, in the clean lines of a balanced ledger, in the quiet knowledge that I was safe. But safety is a funny thing. You build walls to keep the world out, to keep the chaos at bay. You think you are secure behind your contracts and your LLCs. You don't realize that sometimes the threat doesn't come from the outside. Sometimes the threat walks right through the front door, holding your brother's hand, and asks you why you look like a servant in your own kingdom. I had built an empire to protect myself from ever feeling small again. And yet, as I stood on the precipice of Evan's engagement, I realized that my anonymity, my greatest shield, was about to become my greatest weapon. Brielle and her family worked at Larkwell. They walked into my building every day. They sat in chairs I paid for. They drank coffee from the machine I leased. And they had absolutely no idea that the woman they were about to mock held the deed to their entire livelihood. There is a specific role assignment in every family, a casting call that happens when you are children and sticks to you like a second skin well into adulthood. In the Stone family, the roles were clearly defined. Evan was the star. I was the understudy. It was not that my parents did not love me. They did, in a distracted, benign sort of way. They loved me the way you love a reliable old sedan that starts every morning but never turns heads on the highway. I was the sensible one, the independent one, and in the lexicon of suburban parents, independent is code for, we do not need to worry about her, so we will not bother asking. Evan, on the other hand, was the project, he was the investment. This dynamic was never clearer than during our Sunday dinners. These were mandatory weekly rituals where I would drive over to my parents' house, sit at the mahogany table that I knew they couldn't really afford to replace, and listen to a 2-hour monologue about Evan's career. Evan worked in marketing for a large consumer goods company. It was a flashy job. He had business cards with embossed lettering. He went to conferences in Las Vegas and Miami. To my parents, who had worked blue-collar jobs their whole lives, Evan was the epitome of the American dream. "Tell us about the campaign, son," my father would say, leaning forward over his roast chicken, his eyes shining. "Did the client like the pitch?" Evan would beam, loosening his tie. "They loved it. Dad, we are talking about a national rollout in Q3. I might be looking at a senior manager title by Christmas." "That is my boy," my mother would coo, refilling his wine glass. "I always knew you had the head for business." Then, after the applause died down, there would be a polite, brief pivot to me. It was always the same question, delivered with the same tone of vague concern one might use when asking about a sick pet. "And how is your work going?" Alyssa, my mother, would ask. Still at the office. "Yes, Mom," I would reply, cutting my carrots into precise circles. "The office is fine, busy." "Well, it is good to have steady work." My father would nod, closing the subject. "As long as you can pay the bills, that is what matters. No shame in an honest day's work." They had no idea. They had no idea that the office was a holding company that controlled real estate assets worth more than the entire neighborhood they lived in. They had no idea that while Evan was hoping for a 10% bonus, I was approving capital expenditures that exceeded his annual salary. They thought I was a mid-level administrator pushing paper for a faceless boss. I let them think it. Correcting them would feel like bragging, and worse, it would disrupt the narrative they had built their lives around. They needed Evan to be the success story, because they had sacrificed for him if I, the daughter they had left to fend for herself, turned out to be the financial heavyweight. It would not make them proud. It would make them feel guilty. So I stayed in my box. I was the background character. Then came the Sunday when Evan brought Brielle Whitaker home. The energy in the room shifted the moment she walked through the door. Brielle was not just a person. She was a production. She was polished to a high sheen. From her manicured nails to her perfectly highlighted hair, she carried herself with the confidence of a woman who has never been told no without getting a manager involved. "Mr. and Mrs. Stone," she said. handing my mother a bouquet of flowers that I recognized were from a boutique that charged $80 for a dozen stems. It is so wonderful to finally meet the people who raised this incredible man. My mother melted instantly. My father straightened his posture. They were charmed. They were intimidated. They were sold. I stood by the hallway entrance, holding a salad bowl, watching the performance. Evan looked like he had won the lottery. He had his hand on the small of her back, guiding her into the living room as if she were made of porcelain. "And this must be Alyssa," Brielle said, turning her gaze toward me. Her eyes did a quick, vertical scan. It took less than a second, but I felt it. She registered my lack of jewelry. She noted the brand of my shoes: comfortable, sensible, not designer. She categorized me. "Hi, Brielle," I said, offering a smile. "Nice to meet you." "Oh, I love your outfit," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as she stepped closer. "It is so unassuming." Minimalism is such a huge trend right now for people who do not want to spend money on fast fashion. It is very brave. I froze. It was a masterpiece of a sentence. On the surface, it was a compliment. Underneath, it was a diagnostic label: cheap. I looked at her, searching for irony, but her face was a mask of pleasant helpfulness. She wasn't trying to be mean. I realized she just genuinely believed that anyone who didn't dress like a catalog model was doing so out of poverty. "I like to keep things simple," I replied neutrally. "Smart," she nodded, patting my arm. "Save where you can, right?" I swallowed the urge to laugh. I wanted to tell her that the simple cashmere sweater I was wearing cost $400, but it didn't have a logo on the chest, so she couldn't recognize its value. Dinner that night was a coronation. Evan announced they were engaged. My mother cried. My father brought out a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. Brielle held court, talking about wedding themes, color palettes, and the difference between ecru and ivory. I sat at the end of the table, sipping my water, happy for Evan but feeling a cold draft coming from his future wife. She interrupted him constantly. She corrected his stories. She made little jokes at his expense that made him laugh nervously. "Evan is sweet," she told my mother over dessert, "but he needs a little direction. That is why we work. I have the vision, and he is good at following instructions." My parents laughed. They thought it was charming banter. I saw a leash being tightened. 2 weeks later, the families met officially. It was a dinner at a steakhouse downtown. Not one of the ultra-exclusive ones where I took my investors, but a solid, mid-range place with white tablecloths and heavy menus. The Whitakers' Brielle, her mother Donna, and her father Robert arrived 15 minutes late and blamed the valet. Donna Whitaker was an older, louder version of Brielle. She wore too much gold jewelry and treated the waiter with a dismissive snap of her fingers that made my skin crawl. Robert was quieter, a man who looked like he had spent 30 years trying to avoid conflict. The conversation inevitably turned to work. It always does with people who define themselves by their status. "We are very proud of Brielle," Donna announced, cutting into her filet mignon. "She is on the fast track at her firm, but honestly, we are a Larkwell family through and through." I stopped chewing. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth. "Larkwell," my father asked politely. "Is that a law firm?" "Larkwell Strategies Group," Donna corrected, her tone suggesting that not knowing the name was a personal failing. "Management consulting, top tier. Robert has been in logistics oversight there for 10 years. Brielle is in client relations, and my sister, Sarah, runs the HR department. We practically run the place." The air in my lungs seemed to vanish. Larkwell Strategies Group, the company I owned. I stared at Donna, then at Robert, then at Brielle. I tried to place their faces. I had seen employee rosters, of course. I signed off on the payroll budget aggregates. I reviewed the departmental performance reports, but I rarely looked at individual personnel files below the director level. Robert Whitaker, logistics. That meant he worked in the supply chain division on the 3rd floor. Brielle Whitaker, client relations. That was a glorified title for the sales support team on the 2nd floor. And Sarah the aunt in HR. I realized with a jolt of pure, unadulterated shock that I was sitting at a table with 3 people whose monthly paychecks were ultimately funded by my bank account. "It must be nice to have everyone in one place," my mother said, impressed. "Very stable." "Oh, it is the best," Donna bragged, taking a long sip of her martini. "Great benefits, good bonuses. And let us be honest, in this economy, having a secure corporate job is everything. Not everyone can be so lucky." She cast a quick, pitying glance in my direction. "Evan tells us you do property administration," Donna asked me. "Something like that," I managed to say. My voice sounded calm, which was a miracle because my mind was racing at 100 miles an hour. "Well," Donna sighed, "it is good to keep busy, but if you ever want to get into a real career path, maybe Robert could put in a word for you at Larkwell. Although they are very selective, you need a certain polish." I looked at Evan. He was smiling, oblivious. He thought his future mother-in-law was being helpful. He thought she was offering his little sister a leg up. "That is very kind of you," Evan said to Donna. "Alyssa is really organized. She would be great in a support role." A support role. I looked down at my plate. I owned the building they worked in. I owned 45% of the company they worked for. I could technically walk into their office on Monday morning, convene a board meeting, and have security escort them out of the building before lunch. The power dynamic at the table had just flipped so violently that I felt dizzy. They thought they were the royalty dining with the peasants. They didn't know the peasant owned the castle. I took a deep breath. "Say something," a voice in my head urged. "Drop the bomb. Tell them right now." But I didn't. If I told them now, they would pivot. They would backpedal. They would become sycophants. Donna would start complimenting my minimalist clothes. Brielle would suddenly want to be my best friend. I would never know who they really were. I wanted to know how they treated the people they thought were beneath them. I wanted to see exactly what kind of family my brother was marrying into. So I decided to play the game. I would be the poor relation. I would be the administration girl. I would give them enough rope to show me exactly who they were. "Thank you, Donna," I said, lifting my eyes to meet hers. "I will keep that in mind. Stability is important." "It certainly is," she sniffed, "especially when you have bills to pay." The dinner ended with the Whitakers letting my father pick up the check, even though they had ordered the most expensive items on the menu. "We will get the next one," Robert mumbled, looking embarrassed. But Donna just checked her makeup in her compact mirror, unbothered. As we were leaving the restaurant, Evan pulled me aside near the valet stand. The night air was cool, and he looked anxious. "Hey, Liz," he said, using his childhood nickname for me. "Thanks for coming tonight. I know Donna can be a lot." "She is spirited," I said diplomatically. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Listen, about the engagement party next week, the one at the Marlowe." "I am looking forward to it," I said. "I put it on my calendar." "Right," Evan said. He hesitated. "I was wondering, could you maybe dress up a bit, like, really make an effort?" I frowned. "I always dress appropriately." "Evan." I know," he said quickly, raising his hands. "But Brielle is really worried about the aesthetic. She wants everything to be perfect. And you know, sometimes you come to family stuff in jeans or work clothes. Just, please, for me. Wear something that looks expensive. I can lend you some money if you need to buy a dress." The offer hung in the air between us, my brother, offering to lend me $200 to buy a dress, when I had just approved a renovation budget for the very venue he was talking about. It hurt. It hurt because he wasn't trying to be mean. He was trying to protect me from embarrassment, not realizing that he was the one insulting me. He saw me through Brielle's eyes now. He saw me as a problem to be solved, a blemish to be covered up. "You do not need to lend me money, Evan," I said quietly. "I will find something appropriate. I promise I won't embarrass you." Relief washed over his face. He hugged me, squeezing tight. "Thanks, Liz. You are the best. I just want this night to be perfect. Brielle deserves it." "She sure does," I whispered into his shoulder. I watched him walk away toward his car. where Brielle was waiting. She didn't look up to wave at me. She was busy on her phone, probably curating the perfect caption for the night. I got into my car and sat there for a moment in the silence. If they respect me when I have nothing, they deserve the truth. I told myself, if they treat me like dirt because they think I'm weak, then they deserve the consequences. I started the engine. I would go to the party. I would wear the dress. I would play the role. But I was done being invisible. If they wanted to talk about Larkwell, we would talk about Larkwell. But we would do it on my terms, and we would do it when the ink on the contracts was dry. I drove home, the city lights blurring past me. I wasn't just Evan's sister anymore. I wasn't just a landlord. I was a trap waiting to be sprung, and the Whitakers had just walked right into the cage. Love is expensive, but keeping up appearances is what really bankrupts you. After the dinner with the Whitakers, I did some math. I looked at the venue they wanted, the Marlowe Conservatory, and I looked at the average salary of a mid-level marketing manager like my brother. The numbers did not add up. Evan was about to bleed his savings dry to throw a party that was designed to impress people who did not actually care about him. I could not stop him from marrying Brielle. He was an adult, and he was infatuated. But I could stop him from starting his marriage in debt. I decided to intervene, but it had to be a ghost operation. If I wrote Evan a check for $20,000, his pride would make him tear it up. If I told him I owned the venue, the secret I had guarded for years would be out before I was ready. I needed a middle ground. I called Marcus Henderson, the general manager of the Marlowe, on a Tuesday morning from my home office. "Marcus, it is Alyssa Stone," I said, putting my phone on speaker while I reviewed a maintenance log for another property. "Ms. Stone," Marcus answered, his voice instantly snapping to attention. "Good morning. To what do I owe the pleasure? We are still on track for the atrium glass replacement next month, if that is what you are calling about." "Not business today, Marcus. Personal," I said. "My brother, Evan Stone, is inquiring about booking the main garden loft for an engagement party next Saturday. I believe he's on the wait list." "I see," Marcus said. I could hear the clicking of his keyboard. "Yes, I see the inquiry here. Unfortunately, we are fully booked that weekend with a corporate retreat for a pharmaceutical company." "Move them," I said. It was not a question. "Offer them a 20% discount if they shift to the following week, or upgrade their catering package on the house. I will cover the cost difference from the holding company's marketing budget. Just clear the date for Evan." There was a brief pause. "Consider it done. And regarding the billing for your brother—" "That is the important part," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I want you to apply the Friends and Family of Ownership discount. Cap the venue fee at $2,000. Bill him for that amount. The remaining $18,000 invoice it internally to Stone Harbor Holdings under Client Relations and Community Outreach. And Marcus, he cannot know I am involved. Tell him it was a cancellation opening and a promotional rate for local residents. Make something up." "Understood," Marcus said. "And I assume when you attend, we should roll out the red carpet." "Absolutely not," I cut in sharply. "That is the most important rule. When I walk through those doors on Saturday, I am not the owner. I am not Ms. Stone from the holding company. I am just Evan's sister. No special greetings. No offering me the best seat. No asking me about the HVAC system. You treat me exactly like you treat everyone else. If a waiter spills a drink on me, I want an apology, not a resignation letter. Do we understand each other?" "Loud and clear. Ms. Stone, we will treat you like a civilian." I hung up, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. I had solved the money problem. Evan would get his dream venue for the price of a backyard BBQ. He would feel lucky. He would feel like the universe was smiling on him. But as the week went on, the universe started to look less like a smiling face and more like a shark showing its teeth. Because I was paying for the bulk of the event, I had access to the event file in the Marlowe's digital system. I logged in on Thursday night, just 2 days before the party, to check the final head count. I told myself I was just checking for capacity issues. But the truth was, I was curious. I pulled up the RSVP list. It was long, nearly 200 people. For an engagement party, that was excessive, but Brielle liked a crowd. I scrolled past the names of Evan's college buddies and our cousins. Then I started seeing names I did not recognize as friends, but I recognized as data points. Jameson Ford, Vice President of Sales, Larkwell Strategies. Elena Rossi, Director of Regional Operations, Larkwell Strategies. Michael Chang, Senior Consultant, Larkwell Strategies. I stopped scrolling. My stomach tightened. I cross-referenced the names with the Larkwell internal directory I had access to as a major shareholder. Out of the 200 guests, nearly 40 of them were mid to senior level executives from Larkwell Strategies Group. This was not an engagement party. This was a networking event. Brielle and her mother were using my brother's engagement as a ladder. They were packing the room with Brielle's bosses and her father's superiors. They were creating a social environment where they could flaunt their wealth, which was actually my subsidized venue to impress the people who decided their bonuses. It made me feel sick. An engagement party is supposed to be about two families coming together. It is supposed to be about love. But looking at this spreadsheet, I saw a strategic military campaign. Evan was just the prop they needed to justify the gathering. And there was something else, something darker. I saw the name David Thorne on the list. He was the head of the vendor procurement department at Larkwell. And right below him was Robert Whitaker, Brielle's father, who worked in logistics, in the corporate world. Having the head of procurement socializing intimately with a subordinate from logistics was a yellow flag. It wasn't illegal, but it was the kind of cozy relationship where audit trails tended to disappear and preferred vendor contracts got handed out to friends. I sat there in the glow of my monitor, debating what to do. The sister in me wanted to call Evan and scream, "They are using you." But the businesswoman in me knew that accusations without proof are just noise. I needed to see how this played out. I needed to see if this was just social climbing or if it was actual corruption. I opened a new email window. I addressed it to the external audit team that Stone Harbor Holdings used to monitor Larkwell's compliance. I sent it from an anonymized whistleblower account that I had set up years ago for exactly this kind of situation. Subject potential. Conflict of interest. Nepotism review. Priority level medium. Body, please initiate a passive review of the relationship between the logistics department and the procurement department at Larkwell Strategies Group. Cross-reference vendor approvals from the last 4 quarters with personal connections to the Whitaker family. Additionally, flag any large-scale entertaining expenses or client development events that may overlap with personal milestones. Do not interview personnel at this stage. Data collection only. I hit send. I wasn't firing the gun yet. I was just taking the safety off. If Brielle wanted to play corporate politics at her engagement party, she was going to find out that she had invited the wrong regulator to the table. Friday came and went. I spent the day visiting a potential new property in the suburbs, trying to clear my head. Saturday morning, the day of the party, dawned gray and humid. I had gone shopping the day before. I had taken Evan's request to dress up seriously, but I had interpreted it through my own lens. I bought a navy blue silk dress. It was knee-length, with a high neck and long sleeves. It was elegant, but it was severe. It was not a dress that shouted, "Look at me." It was a dress that whispered, "I know who I am." It cost $600, but it had no sequins, no lace, no cutouts. To someone like Brielle, it would look boring. To someone who knew fabric, it was impeccable. I hung the dress in the back of my car in a garment bag. I packed my heels in a tote bag. I wanted to be ready. The plan was simple. I would drive to the city early, check on a quick repair at my Edgewater building, change in the model unit I kept empty there, and arrive at the Marlowe by 6 in the evening, fresh and composed. But real estate does not care about your plans. At 4 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Higgins, the elderly tenant in Unit 3B of the Edgewater building. Alyssa. She sounded frantic. "Water! There is water everywhere! It is coming from the ceiling!" My heart sank. "I am on my way. Mrs. Higgins, turn off the main valve if you can reach it." I was 20 minutes away. I drove like a maniac, praying it was just a leaky washer. It wasn't. When I arrived, I found a disaster. The main supply line between the second and third floors had ruptured. Water was pouring into Mrs. Higgins' kitchen like a waterfall. It wasn't clean water, it was brown. Rusty water from inside the old iron pipes. I didn't think about the party. I didn't think about my silk dress hanging in the car. I thought about the 80-year-old woman standing in her slippers, crying because her photos were getting wet. I went into crisis mode. I ran to the basement to kill the main water line. The valve was stuck. I had to use a heavy wrench and all my body weight to turn it. Rust flakes rained down on my hair. Dirty water splashed onto my shirt. I was sweating, grunting, fighting with a piece of metal that had been installed before I was born. Finally, the water stopped. Then came the cleanup. I couldn't leave Mrs. Higgins alone with the mess. I spent the next hour with a shop vac, sucking up water. I moved furniture. I called the emergency plumber and waited until he arrived to hand off the situation. When I finally walked out of the building, it was 6:30. The party had started 30 minutes ago. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror of my car. I was a wreck. My work clothes, the gray blouse and black trousers I wore for site visits, were damp and wrinkled. There was a smudge of grease on my cheek. My hair, which I had blown out that morning, was reacting to the humidity and the sweat by expanding into a frizzy halo around my head. I looked at the garment bag in the back seat. If I changed now, I would have to find a bathroom. I would have to fix my hair. I would have to do my makeup. It would take another 30 minutes. I would miss the speeches. I would miss the toast. Evan had texted me 3 times. "Where are you?" Mom is asking. I didn't have time to be perfect. I only had time to be present. I made a choice. I grabbed a bottle of water, chugged it, and wiped the grease off my face with a wet wipe. I smoothed my hair down with my hands, though I knew it was a lost cause. "It doesn't matter," I said to the empty car. "I am not the star of the show. I am just the sister." I started the engine and drove toward the Marlowe. As I handed my keys to the valet, I saw the other guests walking in, women in sparkling gowns, men in tuxedos. The air smelled of expensive cologne and money. I walked up the stone steps, my sensible shoes clicking on the pavement. I felt the eyes of the doorman on me. He hesitated for a split second before opening the door, his eyes flicking to my wrinkled trousers. "Checking in," he asked, his tone polite but guarded. "Alyssa Stone," I said, lifting my chin. "Groom's sister." He checked the list. "Ah, yes, right this way." I walked into the atrium. The space was magnificent. The lighting was golden and soft, hiding the industrial edges of the room and making everything look like a dream. The string quartet was playing Debussy. The champagne tower was glistening. And there, in the center of it all, was Brielle. She looked flawless. She looked like a princess in a castle she thought she had conquered. I stood in the entryway for a moment, clutching my purse. I felt the physical discomfort of my damp clothes, the sticky feeling of sweat on my back. But beneath that, I felt a strange, cold clarity. I had paid for the roof over their heads. I had paid for the wine in their glasses. I had approved the contracts for the bosses they were trying to impress. I took a deep breath and stepped into the room. I wasn't walking into a party. I was walking into a final exam. And looking at the way Brielle's eyes narrowed as she spotted me across the room, I knew she was about to fail it. Entering the main atrium of the Marlowe Conservatory felt less like walking into a family celebration, and more like stepping onto a movie set where the director had forgotten to give me the script. The air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the low hum of performative conversation. Everywhere I looked, I saw phones raised in the air. People were not living the moment. They were documenting it. They were curating the lighting, checking their angles, and ensuring that their digital footprint looked significantly more exciting than their actual lives. I stood near the entrance, smoothing my hands over my trousers. The dampness had dried, but the fabric still felt stiff and wrinkled against my legs. In a sea of floor-length satin gowns and tailored tuxedos, I stood out like a bruise on a perfect peach. Brielle spotted me almost immediately. She was standing near the champagne tower, surrounded by her bridesmaids, a phalanx of women in matching blush-pink dresses who laughed in unison, as if they were sharing a single brain. When Brielle's eyes locked onto mine, her smile did not falter. If anything, it widened, exposing a perfect row of whitened teeth. But it was a predator's smile. It was the kind of smile that says, "I see you, and I am going to make you wish you were invisible." She floated toward me, her hand resting possessively on Evan's arm. Evan looked handsome in his tuxedo, but he also looked tired. His smile was a little too fixed, his posture a little too rigid. He was playing his part. "Alyssa!" Brielle exclaimed, her voice pitching high enough to cut through the ambient jazz. "You made it?" She leaned in for a hug, but her body remained a solid 6 inches away from mine. She offered me her cheek, avoiding any contact that might transfer the poverty of my appearance onto her custom gown. "I am so glad you could step away from whatever it was you were doing," she said, pulling back and letting her eyes drag slowly down to my shoes. "We were worried you wouldn't make the cut for the final guest list. I mean, with your schedule." "I had a plumbing emergency at one of the properties," I said, keeping my voice level. "I didn't have time to change." "Oh, a plumbing emergency," Brielle repeated, turning to her friends. "Doesn't that sound grounded? Alyssa is so hands-on. She literally deals with other people's messes." Her friends giggled. It was a soft, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "This is Jessica, Chloe, and Madison," Brielle said, gesturing vaguely at the pink wall of women. She did not introduce me to them. She just let me stand there, a nameless entity in gray, while she turned back to Jessica. "Did you see the lighting by the fountain? We need to get a shot there before the sun goes down fully." I was dismissed, just like that. I was left standing in the circle, but outside of it, I took a step back, intending to find a drink, but one of the bridesmaids, Madison, I think turned to me. She was holding a glass of rosé and looking at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity. "So, Brielle says you work in real estate," she asked. "I do." I nodded. "I work in investment and operations management." Madison tilted her head, processing the words. "Oh, so you run the office." "My cousin does that for a realtor in the suburbs. She answers the phones, organizes the open houses, that sort of thing. It is such a good job for people who like to be organized. You are like the admin behind the scenes, right?" I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw. Investment and operations management, that meant I analyzed risk. I approved 7-figure acquisitions, and I managed a portfolio of assets. To Madison, it meant I answered phones. "It involves a bit more than that," I said politely. "I handle the asset strategy." "Right, totally," she said, clearly losing interest. "Admin is so important. Someone has to keep the files straight while the agents are out making the real money. Right?" She didn't wait for an answer. She turned back to the group because the photographer had arrived. This was the moment the night shifted from a party to a photo shoot. The photographer was a frantic man with a large camera and a loud voice, barking instructions like a drill sergeant. "Okay, let's get the happy couple center frame, chin down. Evan Brielle, hand on his chest, laugh, like he just whispered something funny." I watched my brother. He did exactly as he was told. He tilted his chin. He placed his hand. He produced a fake laugh on command. He looked like a doll being posed. "Perfect now. Let's get the parents," the photographer shouted. My parents and the Whitakers rushed into the frame. Donna Whitaker was practically glowing, elbowing her way to the center next to Brielle. My parents stood on the other side, looking proud but slightly awkward. "And the sister?" "Where is the sister?" the photographer called out. Looking at his checklist, I stepped forward. I saw Brielle's face tighten. "Okay, squeeze in," the photographer said. I moved to stand next to my mother. "Wait," Brielle said, holding up a hand. "Actually, the symmetry is off. Alyssa, maybe you could stand on the end, next to my dad." "No, a little further over. We want the core couple to pop." I moved to the end of the line. "A little more," Brielle directed, making a shooing motion with her manicured hand. "Just give us some space. We don't want the frame to look cluttered." I took another step. I was now standing on the very edge of the carpet, half of my body practically behind a large potted fern. Perfect, Brielle chirped. The flash went off. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would be cropped out of that photo when it was posted on Instagram. I was there, but I wasn't there. I was a footnote in their visual narrative. After the photos, the group dispersed to mingle. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water and retreated to the periphery, near a pillar wrapped in fairy lights. From my vantage point, I could see the entire room. I could see the mechanics of the social climbing happening in real time. I watched Donna Whitaker holding court near the bar. She had cornered a man I recognized, Jameson Ford, the VP of sales at Larkwell. He looked polite but trapped, nursing his drink while Donna talked at him with animated gestures. I drifted closer, pretending to examine the floral arrangements, until I was within earshot. And you know, we were so thrilled when Evan proposed, Donna was saying, her voice loud enough to be heard 3 tables away. But honestly, it is such a relief that he is marrying into a Larkwell family. We understand the corporate culture. We are practically royalty in the company at this point. I saw Jameson Ford blink. He took a sip of his drink to hide a grimace. Well, Robert has been with us a long time, Jameson said diplomatically. Exactly, Donna beamed. And now with Brielle rising through the ranks honestly, when we got the invite to this venue, I told Robert, see, this is the Larkwell influence. We get treated differently because people know who we are. We have a position to uphold. I almost choked on my water. The irony was so sharp it could have drawn blood. She was bragging about her position to a senior executive, claiming credit for a venue booking that I had secured, all while standing in a building I owned. She was wearing my generosity like a medal she had won in a war she didn't even know she was fighting. We are just a cut above, Donna concluded, looking around the room with satisfaction. It is important to keep the circle tight, quality over quantity. I turned away, feeling a wave of nausea. It wasn't just arrogance, it was delusion. I needed to find Evan. I needed to see a friendly face. I scanned the room and found him near the DJ booth, laughing with 2 of his college friends. I started to walk toward him, but a hand shot out and grabbed my elbow. It was Brielle. She wasn't smiling anymore. The camera was gone. The audience was gone. It was just us, in the shadow of a large decorative column. Where do you think you are going? She hissed, her voice low and tight. I was going to say hello to my brother, I said, looking at her hand on my arm until she let go. Don't, she said. He is having a moment with the guys. He looks happy. He looks successful. She took a step closer, invading my personal space. The scent of her perfume, something heavy and floral, was overpowering. Look, Alyssa, she said, her tone dripping with faux concern. I tried to be nice. I tried to include you, but look at you. She gestured vaguely at my wrinkled trousers and my frizzy hair. You are wandering around this room like a lost child, she said. And honestly, it is bringing everyone down. People are asking me who the sad woman in the gray outfit is. You are ruining the vibe. There it was, the hook, the sentence I would never forget. I am ruining the vibe, I repeated slowly, locking eyes with her. Yes, she snapped. This is a high-end event. We have important people here, executives, investors, and then there is you, looking like you just crawled out of a basement. Poor people always do this. You bring this heaviness. It is like you want everyone to feel bad for you because you can't get your life together. She leaned in, her whisper sharp as a razor blade. Do me a favor. Go hide in the hallway or the bathroom until the cake cutting. Just stay out of the photos. Stay out of the way. Let Evan have this one night where he doesn't have to be embarrassed by his family. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained stone. I did not scream. I did not slap her. I did what I always do. I recorded. I memorized the exact phrasing. Poor people always do this. You are ruining the vibe. I noted the time, 7:15 in the evening. I noted the witnesses, a waiter passing by with a tray of empty glasses, who quickly looked away. A security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling, its red light blinking steadily. I understand, I said. My voice was so calm it sounded foreign to my own ears. "You want me to disappear. I want you to be invisible," she corrected. "Just for tonight." She patted my arm again, that same patronizing, dismissive pat, and turned back toward the light, instantly switching her smile back on as she greeted another guest. I stood there in the shadows for a moment, letting the words settle into my skin. "I want you to be invisible." I looked across the room at Evan. He was throwing his head back, laughing at something his friend had said. He was holding a drink, looking relaxed, looking golden. He had no idea what his fiancée had just said to me. He had no idea that his perfect night was being held together by my silence and my checkbook. That was the part that hurt. It wasn't Brielle's cruelty. I expected that from her. It was Evan's blindness. He was so eager to be part of her world that he didn't notice his own sister being erased from it. I couldn't stay in that room. The air was too thin. I turned and walked toward the side exit, my heels clicking softly on the marble. I pushed through the heavy double doors into the quiet of the administrative corridor. The noise of the party faded to a dull roar behind me. I leaned against the cool wall, closing my eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. I needed a moment, just one moment to compose myself before I decided whether to leave or to stay and burn it all down. And then, just as I opened my eyes, the door to the general manager's office opened. "Ms. Stone." I looked up. It was time. The universe has a funny way of delivering the right person at exactly the right moment. The hallway was quiet, a stark contrast to the cacophony of jazz and forced laughter I had just left behind. Marcus Henderson stood in the doorway of his office, looking relieved to see me. He held a tablet in one hand and a stylus in the other, his posture shifting from administrative stress to professional deference the moment our eyes met. "Ms. Stone," he said, stepping into the corridor and letting the door click shut behind him. "I apologize for interrupting your evening. I assumed you were fully occupied with the festivities, so I was going to email this to your team on Monday. But since you are standing right here, do you have 30 seconds? I looked at Marcus. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car, and he was looking at me in my wrinkled trousers and frizzy hair like I was the only person in the building who mattered. It was a grounding sensation. It reminded me that outside of Brielle's distorted little bubble, I was not a charity case. I was a force. "I have 30 seconds, Marcus," I said, my voice steady. "What is it?" He tapped the screen of his tablet and held it out to me. The structural engineer just uploaded the revised load-bearing calculations for the second-floor expansion, the ones we discussed last Tuesday. If we want to keep the contractor on the current timeline, we need to approve the variance in the steel budget. It is a bump of about $15,000, but it guarantees we open the new wing before the holiday season. I took the tablet. The blue light of the screen illuminated my face. I scanned the numbers, my brain automatically switching from hurt sister to asset manager. The variance was within the contingency fund I had set aside. "The contingency covers this," I said, using my stylus to scroll down to the signature line. "As long as it does not push the opening date back, approve it. But tell them I want the updated safety inspection report on my desk by Friday." "Understood," Marcus nodded, watching me sign. "I will send the authorization tonight." I handed the tablet back to him. "Thank you, Marcus. And the event is the staff handling everything okay?" "Smooth sailing, Ms. Stone, although the bar tab is climbing faster than usual. Your brother's guests are thirsty." I managed a small, dry smile. "Let them drink. It is a celebration." "Alyssa." The voice came from behind me. It was sharp, incredulous, and laced with panic. I turned slowly. Brielle was standing at the junction where the hallway met the atrium. She had evidently followed me, likely to ensure I was obeying her command to hide in the bathroom. But she wasn't looking at my clothes anymore. She was looking at Marcus. Her eyes darted between the general manager of the most exclusive venue in Chicago and me. She saw the tablet. She saw the deferential nod he gave me. She saw the way I stood, not slumped in defeat, but square-shouldered and commanding. "Brielle," I said coolly, "I thought I was supposed to be invisible." She ignored me, her gaze fixing on Marcus. Mr. Henderson, what is going on? Is there a problem with the bill? Because my father said he handled the deposit. Marcus looked at her, then at me, confusion knitting his brows. He clearly didn't understand why the bride-to-be was speaking to the owner of the building with such aggression. There is no problem with the bill, Ms. Whitaker, Marcus said smoothly. I was just getting a signature from Ms. Stone regarding some internal operations. A signature, Brielle repeated. She laughed, but it was a brittle, nervous sound. Why would you need a signature from Alyssa? She doesn't work here. She is just my fiancé's sister. Marcus opened his mouth to correct her, to explain exactly who signed his paychecks, but I caught his eye. I gave a microscopic shake of my head. Not yet, my eyes said. Let her dig. Ms. Stone is a valued associate, Marcus said diplomatically, pivoting to a neutral phrase. Now, if you will excuse me, I have vendors to manage. Enjoy your evening, ladies. He nodded to me once more, a nod of genuine respect, and disappeared back into his office. The silence that followed was heavy. Brielle stared at the closed door, her mind working furiously to rearrange the puzzle pieces. She was smart enough to know that general managers do not ask random guests to sign operational documents. She was smart enough to know that the dynamic she just witnessed did not fit the narrative of Alyssa the poor relation. What was that? She demanded, turning on me. Her face was pale beneath her makeup. Why was he acting like he works for you? Maybe he is just polite, I said, shrugging. Some people value manners. Brielle, regardless of who they are talking to. She took a step back, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. The confidence that had armored her all night was showing hairline cracks. She looked at my clothes again, but this time, her expression wasn't disgust, it was suspicion. You are up to something, she whispered. You are trying to make me look stupid. I told you to stay out of the way. And I am out of the way, I replied. We are in a hallway. You are the one who followed me. Before she could answer, the double doors at the end of the corridor swung open. A group of 3 men walked out, talking loudly and laughing. They were clearly taking a break from the party to check emails or make calls. I recognized the man in the center immediately. It was Julian Vance, the Chief Operating Officer of Larkwell Strategies Group. He was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and a reputation for being ruthless with numbers but charming with people. He was Brielle's ultimate boss's boss. He was the kind of man Donna Whitaker would kill to have 5 minutes of FaceTime with. Brielle froze. She instantly smoothed her dress and plastered a bright, terrifyingly fake smile onto her face. Mr. Vance? She chirped, stepping forward. I am so honored you could make it, my father. Robert was just saying how much he appreciates. Julian Vance didn't even see her. His eyes had landed on me. He stopped mid-stride. A look of genuine surprise and recognition washed over his features. He stepped right past Brielle, as if she were a potted plant, and extended his hand toward me. Alyssa, he boomed, his voice warm and booming. I did not know you were going to be here. I thought you hated these social obligations. I took his hand. His grip was firm. Hello, Julian. It is my brother's engagement. Hard to skip this one. Your brother. Julian looked from me to the party inside. Evan Stone is your brother, my God. I did not make the connection. Small world. He leaned in closer, dropping his voice slightly, ignoring the fact that Brielle was standing 3 feet away with her mouth hanging open. Listen, while I have you, Julian said seriously, I wanted to say thank you for signing off on the Q4 budget expansion for the tech overhaul. I know the board was hesitant about the cost, but your vote tipped the scale. The new servers are going to save us a fortune in downtime next year. Smart move. It was the only logical move, Julian, I said. You cannot build a future on outdated infrastructure. We both know that. Amen to that, he laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. See, this is why we like having you in the mix. You see the bottom line clearly. He finally turned and seemed to notice Brielle standing there, frozen like a statue. And this must be the lucky bride, Julian said. offering her a polite, distracted smile. Congratulations. Great venue. You know, Alyssa has excellent taste in real estate. I am not surprised she helped pick this place. The air left the corridor. Brielle looked at Julian. She looked at me. She looked back at Julian. Alyssa voted on the budget, Brielle asked. Her voice was so faint it was barely a whisper. The Larkwell budget. Julian frowned, sensing the tension but not understanding the context. Well, yes, as a primary stakeholder, her approval is required for any capital expenditure over $50,000. Did you not know? He looked at me, raising an eyebrow. Is this one of those silent partner things you are so fond of? Alyssa, did I just spill the beans? It is fine, Julian, I said calmly. We were just getting around to introductions. Brielle's face was a mask of absolute horror. In the span of 2 minutes, her entire world had inverted. The woman she had mocked for being poor, the woman she had told to hide because she ruined the vibe, was not only the person who controlled the venue she was standing in, she was the person who controlled the company Brielle worked for. She realized, with a sickening thud, that the admin comment her bridesmaid made wasn't just wrong, it was dangerously, suicidally wrong. She looked at me, and for the first time, she saw the clothes for what they were, not poverty, indifference, the indifference of someone who doesn't need to dress up to prove they have power. Alyssa, she stammered. Her voice shook. I didn't know. You never said. She reached out, her hand trembling, trying to touch my arm, a gesture of intimacy she had refused me 10 minutes ago. Oh my God. She let out a frantic, high-pitched laugh. This is so funny. Why didn't you tell us we should get a picture? Mom, come here. Donna Whitaker had just emerged from the restroom further down the hall. Hearing her daughter's frantic tone, she hurried over, her heels clicking rapidly on the floor. What is it? What is wrong? Donna asked, eyeing me suspiciously. Is she bothering you? Brielle, I told you. We should have had security. Mom, stop! Brielle practically shrieked. She grabbed her mother's arm, digging her fingers in. This is Julian Vance. Mr. Vance, the COO. Donna's face transformed instantly into a sycophantic mask. Oh, Mr. Vance, what an honor I am. Donna Whitaker, my husband Robert works in logistics. We are such a Larkwell family. Julian nodded politely. Pleasure. I was just catching up with Alyssa. Donna blinked. She looked at me, then at Julian. With Alyssa? Oh, does she know you? Is she applying for a job? I told her we could maybe put in a good word for an administrative role. Brielle closed her eyes. I could practically see her soul leaving her body. Actually, Donna, I said, my voice cutting through the air like a knife through soft butter. I am not applying for a job. I turned to Julian. I think Donna is under the impression that I'm looking for work, but correct me if I'm wrong. Julian, didn't I just approve the executive bonus structure for this fiscal year? Julian chuckled, shaking his head. You certainly did, and I'm hoping my performance review meets your standards, or my Christmas is going to be very bleak. Donna stopped breathing. She looked at me with wide, terrifying eyes. The realization hit her slower than it hit Brielle, but when it landed, it was heavier. Executive bonus structure, performance review. You, Donna whispered, you are management. No, I said softly. Management works for the owners. I am the owner. I let the words hang there. I let them soak into the expensive carpet. I let them bounce off the walls. I am the owner. Brielle looked like she was going to faint. Her hand went to her throat. She looked at Julian, desperate for him to say it was a joke. But Julian just stood there, looking at me with respect. Well, Julian said, checking his watch, oblivious to the fact that he had just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of a wedding party. I should get back in. My wife is waiting for a drink. Alyssa, are you coming? We can discuss the merger rumors later. In a minute, Julian, I said. I have a family matter to attend to. Right. Good to see you. Julian nodded to the Whitakers, a nod that was significantly less warm than the one he gave me, and walked back into the party. We were alone again. Me, Brielle, and Donna. Donna opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Brielle. She owns Larkwell. A significant portion, I clarified. Enough to ensure that the company culture remains respectful. I looked at Brielle. Her eyes were wet. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she was terrified. She was replaying every insult, every microaggression, every sneer from the last 3 months, and realizing that she had been spitting in the face of the person who held her future in her hands. "Alyssa," Brielle choked out, "I was just stressed. The wedding planning, you know how it is. I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," I said. "You said poor people ruin the vibe. You said I looked like a waitress. You said I should be invisible." I took a step closer to her. She flinched. "I am not going to fire you tonight, Brielle," I said quietly, "because this is Evan's night, and unlike you, I actually care about his happiness." "Thank you," she breathed, a sob escaping her throat. "Thank you. Alyssa, we can start over. I will fix this. Let's go take that picture. We will put you right in the middle." She reached for me again, desperate to drag me back into the light, to use me as a shield now that she knew what I was. She wanted to parade me around. She wanted to show everyone that she was best friends with the owner. I stepped back, out of her reach. "No," I said. "I don't think so. I liked your advice from earlier. I think I will stay out of the frame." "Please," Donna begged, her voice trembling. "We didn't know. If we had known—" "That is the problem, Donna," I said. "You shouldn't have to know someone holds the checkbook to treat them like a human being." I turned away from them. I didn't want to look at their fear anymore. It was satisfying. Yes, but it was also pathetic. I pushed open the doors and walked back into the party. The noise washed over me again. I scanned the room until I found Evan. He was standing near the cake, waiting for Brielle. He looked so hopeful. He looked so innocent in all of this. I walked up to him. I ignored the stares of the people who still thought I was the poor sister. I ignored the whispers. "Evan," I said. He turned, his face lighting up. "Hey, there you are." "Where have you been? Brielle was looking for you." "I know," I said. "I found her." I reached out and hugged him. I hugged him hard. Holding on for a second longer than usual, I was hugging the brother I loved, and I was saying goodbye to the version of his life where he was happily ignorant. "I have to go, Evan," I said, pulling back. "Go, but we haven't cut the cake yet," he protested. "I know, but I have a headache." I lied. "And honestly, I think I have done enough for one night." "Okay," he said, looking concerned. "Are you okay to drive? Do you need money for a cab?" I almost laughed. "I am fine. Evan, keep your money. You are going to need it." "What does that mean?" he asked, confused. "Just be careful, Evan," I said. "And happy engagement." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back at the confused expression on his face. I didn't look back to see Brielle and Donna stumbling back into the room, their faces pale and eyes darting around in panic. I walked out the front doors of the Marlowe Conservatory. The valet saw me coming and ran to get my car. As I stood on the curb, waiting, I pulled my phone out of my purse. I opened my email app. I found the draft I had started earlier, the one about the conflict of interest investigation. I added a new line to the bottom. Expand the scope to include a full audit of the Client Relations Department's expense accounts. Specifically, verify all client entertainment expenses filed by Brielle Whitaker in the last 12 months. I hit send. The valet pulled up in my sedan. He opened the door for me. "Have a good night, ma'am," he said. "I will," I replied. I got in the car and drove away. The party was still raging in the rearview mirror, glowing like a lantern in the night. Inside, they were drinking champagne and celebrating a union built on lies and social climbing. But the party was over. The workday had just begun. Monday morning at Larkwell Strategies Group usually began with the hum of the espresso machine and the murmur of weekend gossip. For the past 3 years, I had entered the building through the side entrance, swiped my badge which listed me as external consultant, and taken the service elevator to the small office I kept on the 4th floor. I was a ghost in my own machine, observing the gears turn without ever touching them. Today, however, I walked through the front revolving doors at 8:30 in the morning. I was wearing a charcoal suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life, and for the first time, I did not head for the service elevator. I walked straight to the security desk. The guard, a man named Sam, whom I had ensured received a holiday bonus for the last 2 years, looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Ms. Stone," he said. "The badge scanner on the side door is working if you need it." "Not today, Sam," I said, pulling a different card from my purse. This one was black with gold lettering. It was the master key card for the board of directors. "I am going up to the executive suite." I swiped the card at the turnstile. It chirped a cheerful, affirmative tone that sounded distinctly different from the standard employee beep. I walked to the main elevator bank, pressed the button for the top floor, and felt the sudden upward lurch of gravity. I wasn't here to scream. I wasn't here to throw a drink in anyone's face. I was here to do what I did best, clean up a mess using the cold, hard tools of corporate governance. When I sat down in the private conference room attached to the CEO's office, a room I had legal access to but rarely used, I opened my laptop. The first thing I did was log into the secure server. The second thing I did was check my email, and there it was. Brielle had been busy. At 7:45 that morning, an email had been sent to the Human Resources General Inbox, copying the Chief Operating Officer and, ironically, the anonymous investor relation email that routed directly to me. Subject: formal complaint. Harassment and hostile work environment. I opened it. The text was a masterpiece of creative fiction. To Human Resources and Executive Leadership, I am writing to formally document an incident of harassment and intimidation that occurred this past Saturday at a company-adjacent event. During my engagement party, I was cornered by an individual named Alyssa Stone, who I understand has a peripheral association with our firm. Ms. Stone used threatening language, attempted to physically intimidate me in a secluded hallway, and made disparaging remarks about my family's standing within Larkwell Strategies. I felt unsafe and targeted. Furthermore, Ms. Stone implied she had undue influence over my employment, which I believe constitutes a hostile abuse of power. I am requesting an immediate review of her access to our building and a formal restraining order regarding her interaction with my team. Sincerely, Brielle Whitaker, Senior Client Relations Manager. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long, slow breath. It was a classic strike-first tactic. She knew she had been exposed in the hallway with Julian Vance. She knew she was in danger. So, instead of apologizing, she was trying to paint me as the aggressor. She was trying to create a paper trail that would make any future disciplinary action against her look like retaliation. It was smart, but it was also the move of someone who did not understand that when you strike a king, or in this case a queen, you had better kill them. I did not reply to the email. I did not get angry. I simply forwarded it to Elias Thorne, the head of our external legal counsel, and attached a simple note. Please open a file. Do not respond to the claimant yet. I am initiating a full internal compliance audit regarding the Whitaker family. I want everything by noon. Then, I went to work. The first person I summoned was the director of compliance, a woman named Patricia, who had a reputation for being about as warm as a glacier. When she entered the conference room and saw me sitting at the head of the table, she didn't blink. She knew who I was. She was one of the 5 people in the building who did. "Patricia," I said, sliding a folder across the table. "We have a nepotism problem." "The Whitakers?" she asked, sitting down. "I have had my eye on that cluster for 6 months, but every time I try to flag a file, it gets stalled in HR. "That is because Sarah Whitaker is the deputy director of HR," I said. "We are going to bypass her. I want a full audit of every hire, every promotion, and every expense report connected to Robert, Donna, Brielle, and Sarah Whitaker for the last 5 years." That is a lot of data, Patricia said, opening her laptop. I have time, I replied. And Patricia looked specifically for sponsorship allocation. I want to know how many times the Larkwell brand has been used to secure personal favors. For the next 4 hours, the room became a war room. We didn't shout, we typed, we cross-referenced, we pulled data from the server that Brielle likely didn't even know existed. The picture that emerged was not just ugly, it was legally actionable. At 10 o'clock, we found the hiring records. Brielle had been hired 3 years ago. Her interview scores were mediocre at best. She had failed the initial logic assessment test, but there was a manual override in the system, authorized by Sarah Whitaker, citing exceptional soft skills and cultural fit. Cultural fit, that was the code word. At 10:30, we found the expense reports. Robert Whitaker, Brielle's father, had charged the company for a client retention dinner 3 months ago. The bill was for $400 at a steakhouse. The attendees listed were prospective logistics partners, but when we cross-referenced the date with his calendar, it was his 30th wedding anniversary. Fraud. Small fraud, perhaps, but fraud nonetheless. But the real smoking gun came at 11:15. Patricia made a noise in her throat, a sharp intake of breath. You need to see this, she said, spinning her laptop around. It was an email chain from 6 months ago. Brielle had requested a corporate sponsorship package for a charity gala. Larkwell had cut a check for $5,000 to the charity. Standard practice. But attached to the email was a side conversation between Brielle and the event organizer. Brielle, if I get Larkwell to sponsor the gold tier, can you comp 2 VIP tickets for my parents? They really want to sit at the head table. Organizer done. She had traded company funds for personal access. That was a direct violation of the conflict of interest policy. It was fireable on the spot. Print it, I said. There is more, Patricia said, her voice grim. I decided to dig into the hostile work environment claim Brielle made against you. I thought I would look for a pattern. She pulled up a suppressed file from the HR archives. It was a complaint filed 2 years ago by a receptionist named Elena. Complaint Brielle Whitaker threw a cup of coffee into the trash can next to my desk because it was cold, splashing my blouse. She told me that if I couldn't operate a coffee pot, I should go back to community college. I felt humiliated. The complaint had been marked resolved by Sarah Whitaker. The resolution note read, misunderstanding. Employee counseled on coffee machine maintenance. My blood ran cold. It was the exact same language she had used with me. Poor people ruin the vibe. Go back to community college. It wasn't just a bad night at an engagement party. This was who she was. She was a bully who used her family's mid-level power to kick down anyone she perceived as beneath her. She has a history, I said softly, and her aunt has been covering it up. We have enough to terminate her for cause right now, Patricia said. Between the sponsorship kickback and the hiring irregularities, she is done. Sarah is done too. Not yet, I said. She accused me of threatening her. I need to bury that lie first. I picked up my phone and called Marcus Henderson at the Marlowe. Marcus, I said, I need a favor. The security cameras in the administrative hallway. Do they record? 24/7, Marcus replied. But no audio? Wiretapping laws? Video is fine. Send me the timestamp from 7:10 to 7:20 last Saturday night. 5 minutes later, a video file arrived in my inbox. Patricia and I watched it on the large conference screen. The footage was black and white, but the narrative was clear. It showed me standing by the wall, looking tired. It showed Brielle following me. It showed her cornering me. It showed her finger jabbing toward my face. It showed her leaning into my personal space, her body language aggressive, dominant. I stood still, my arms at my sides. I did not lunge. I did not point. I just stood there. Then, the video showed Marcus coming out. It showed Brielle's panic. It showed Julian Vance walking out. It showed the complete collapse of her posture. Well, Patricia said, leaning back, that certainly does not look like you were the one doing the intimidating. No, I said. It looks like a senior manager harassing a shareholder. We had the financial fraud. We had the behavioral pattern. We had the video evidence proving her email was a lie. It was over. I could push the button and Brielle would be escorted out of the building by security before lunch. But there was one final piece of the puzzle. I wanted to know about her work. Evan had always told me how smart Brielle was, how she was a rising star who came up with brilliant campaigns. I wanted to verify that. If she was a terrible person but a genius at her job, it made the decision harder. I called in Kevin, a quiet associate from the client relations team. He had been with the company for 5 years but had never been promoted. When he walked into the executive conference room and saw me, he looked terrified. "Sit down, Kevin," I said gently. "You are not in trouble. I just want to ask you about the Project Horizon pitch, the one Larkwell won last month." Kevin's eyes shifted nervously. "The one Brielle led." "Yes," I said. "The one Brielle led?" I slid a copy of the presentation deck across the table. "This is excellent work. The data analysis on slide 14 is particularly complex. Can you walk me through the methodology Brielle used to get these projections?" Kevin looked at the slide. He swallowed hard. He looked at the door, as if checking for spies. "She didn't use a methodology," Kevin whispered. "What do you mean?" "I did," Kevin said, his voice trembling. "I built the model. I spent 3 weeks on it. Brielle asked me to send her the raw file so she could review the formatting. The next day, she presented it to the client. My name was taken off the title slide. She told me that since she is the manager, it is a team effort, and the team wins when she wins." I closed my eyes for a second. It was the final nail. Intellectual property theft. She wasn't just a bully. She was a fraud. She was climbing the ladder by stepping on the fingers of people like Kevin, people who actually did the work. "Thank you, Kevin," I said. "You can go. And Kevin, expect a title change next week." He left the room looking like he had seen a ghost and an angel at the same time. I looked at the pile of evidence on the table. It was 1:00 in the afternoon. The file contained 1 count of hiring fraud, 2 counts of expense account manipulation, 1 count of quid pro quo vendor corruption, 1 count of filing a false HR report, multiple counts of workplace harassment, 1 confirmed instance of plagiarism. It was not a personnel file anymore. It was an indictment. "What do you want to do?" Patricia asked. "Do we call her in now?" I looked at the stack of papers. I thought about Evan. I thought about how happy he had looked holding her hand. I thought about how he had offered to lend me money for a dress. If I fired her now, in the middle of the workday, she would spin it. She would go home to Evan crying. She would tell him that his evil sister used her power to crush her because of a personal vendetta. She would play the victim, and Evan, who had a savior complex a mile wide, would believe her. He would hate me. It would tear the family apart. I couldn't just win the battle. I had to win the war for the truth. "No," I said, closing the folder. "We don't fire her today." "We don't?" Patricia looked stunned. "No, we suspend her," I said, "pending a full investigation. Send her home. Tell her access is revoked until further notice. Do the same for Sarah Whitaker and Robert Whitaker. Tell them it is a standard compliance audit. And then, I stood up, smoothing my suit. "I am going to call a family meeting. I am not going to tell Evan that I fired his fiancée. I am going to show him exactly who he's marrying. I'm going to put this file on the kitchen table, and I am going to let the facts do the talking." I picked up the black executive keycard. "The engagement is over," I said. "But I want to make sure that when it ends, my brother walks away knowing that I didn't ruin his life. I saved it." I walked out of the conference room. I had the ammunition. Now I just needed to get everyone in the same room without them knowing they were walking into a courtroom. I took out my phone and sent a text to the family group chat. "Mom, Dad, Evan, we need to talk. Tonight, my place. It is about the wedding." I watched the 3 little dots appear as Evan started to type. "Is everything okay?" "Brielle is really upset about Saturday." I typed back. "Bring her. We will settle everything tonight." I put the phone in my pocket. The sun was shining outside. But inside Larkwell Strategies, The storm had just made landfall. I changed the location of the meeting. I had initially texted them to come to my home, but I realized that my living room was too soft. It had throw pillows and warm lighting. It was a place for forgiveness. I did not want forgiveness yet. I wanted accountability. So, I sent a follow-up message with an address that confused them, 1 Larkwell Plaza, Suite 4400. When my parents, Evan, Brielle, and the Whitakers arrived at the lobby of the Larkwell building at 7 in the evening, they looked disoriented. The building was a tower of steel and glass that pierced the Chicago skyline, and the lobby was a cavern of marble that echoed with the footsteps of the cleaning crews and the late-night analysts. I was waiting for them past the security turnstiles. My mother was the first to spot me. She was wearing her church coat, clutching her purse with both hands. When she saw me standing next to the security desk, not in my usual oversized sweater and in the charcoal suit I had worn to destroy Brielle's career earlier that day, she stopped walking. "Alyssa," she called out, her voice bouncing off the high ceilings. "Honey, why are we here? Is this where you work?" I swiped my badge to open the glass gates. "Hello, Mom, Dad, Evan." I looked at Brielle. She was pale. She was wearing a trench coat buttoned to her chin, and she was refusing to make eye contact with the security guard. She knew, or at least, she suspected, beside her. Donna Whitaker looked annoyed, checking her watch as if this meeting were an imposition on her very important schedule. "We are here because we need a neutral place to talk," I said. "Come upstairs." As we walked toward the elevator bank, a young man from the IT department rushed out of a service door. He almost ran into my father, but when he saw me, he froze. "Ms. Stone," he said, straightening his tie. "I am sorry. I didn't know you were in the building. We are running the server updates tonight, just like you authorized." "Thank you, David," I said calmly. "Carry on." My father looked at the young man, then at me. "He knows you." "I work here, Dad," I said. "I thought you were in administration," my father muttered, looking at the gold elevator doors. "I am," I said as the doors opened. "I administer everything." The ride to the 44th floor was silent. The only sound was the hum of the lift and the shallow breathing of Brielle Whitaker. When the doors opened, we stepped directly into the executive reception area. The lights were dimmed, but the view of the city was blinding. Chicago sprawled out beneath us, a grid of amber and white. I led them past the empty cubicles, past the corner offices with their mahogany desks, and into the main boardroom. It was a room designed to intimidate. The table was 20 feet long, made of polished black glass. There were 12 leather chairs. I walked to the head of the table. I did not sit down. "Please," I said, gesturing to the chairs. "Sit." Evan sat to my right. Brielle sat next to him, gripping his hand so hard her knuckles were white. My parents sat to my left. Donna and Robert Whitaker took the seats at the far end, looking like they were waiting for a waiter to take their order. "Okay, Lise," Evan said, his voice tight. "What is going on?" "You have been acting weird since the party. Brielle has been crying all day. She says you threatened her." "I did not threaten her, Evan," I said. "I clarified her position." "Clarified her position," Donna scoffed from the end of the table. "You cornered my daughter in a hallway. You are jealous because she is successful and you are well. Whatever it is you do, this is ridiculous. We are leaving." "If you leave, Donna," I said, my voice dropping an octave, "security will confiscate your husband's access badge before he reaches the lobby, and your sister Sarah will be escorted out of the building tomorrow morning by legal counsel." Donna froze halfway out of her chair. Robert Whitaker looked up, his eyes wide with fear. "Sit down," I commanded. Donna sat. I placed a single manila folder on the table. The sound of it hitting the glass was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Evan," I said, turning to my brother, "you are my family. I love you. I have watched you work hard your entire life, and because I love you, I cannot let you walk into a marriage that is built on a lie." "It is not a lie," Evan said defensively. Brielle loves me. Does she? I asked. Or does she love the idea of you? Does she love the access you give her? Alyssa, stop it, Brielle whispered, tears starting to well up in her eyes. Please, don't do this. I ignored her. At your engagement party, Evan, your fiancé, pulled me aside. She told me that I looked like a waitress. She told me that poor people ruin the vibe. She told me to hide in the bathroom so I would not be in the photographs. Evan looked at Brielle. He looked shocked. Brielle, you said you told me you just gave her fashion advice. I did, Brielle cried, squeezing his hand. I just said the dress was a little casual. She is twisting my words, Evan. You know how sensitive she is about money. She has a complex. I have a recording. I lied. I didn't have audio. But she didn't know that. Brielle's mouth snapped shut. And I have video, I continued, of you backing me into a corner, of you poking a finger in my face. You were not giving advice. Brielle, you were bullying me because you thought I was powerless. You thought I was just Evan's poor sister who could be pushed around. That is a misunderstanding, Donna interjected, trying to regain control. It is a class thing. You have to understand. Alyssa, Brielle is under a lot of pressure. She is navigating high society corporate culture. Sometimes people from simpler backgrounds, they misinterpret the tone. I looked at Donna. Simpler backgrounds. Well, yes, Donna said, smoothing her skirt. We are a Larkwell family. We have standards. I opened the folder. Let us talk about those standards, I said. I slid a piece of paper down the table toward Evan. What is this? Evan asked, picking it up. That is an email chain, I said. From Brielle to the charity gala organizers last year. Read the highlighted section. Evan read it, his brow furrowed. If I get Larkwell to sponsor the gold tier, can you comp 2 VIP tickets for my parents? He looked up. I don't understand. She used company money, $5,000 of shareholder capital, to buy popularity for her parents. I explained. That is not high society. Donna, that is theft. That is called kickbacks. Everyone does it, Brielle shouted, her voice shrill. It is networking. No, Brielle, I said calmly. Everyone does not do it. People with integrity do not do it. I slid another document across the table. And this, I pointed, this is a hiring report. Sarah Whitaker, your aunt, bypassed 3 qualified candidates to hire you. Candidates with MBAs. Candidates with experience. You were hired because your aunt erased their scores. My parents were staring at me. They were not looking at the papers. They were looking at me. They had never seen this Alyssa. They had never seen the woman who could command a room, who spoke with the precision of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. Alyssa, my mother whispered, how do you know all this? How do you have these papers? Because I own the company, Mom, I said. The silence that followed lasted for 10 seconds. It was absolute. What? My father asked, his voice cracking. I own Larkwell Strategies Group, I said. I bought the building 5 years ago. I bought the controlling stake in the operating company 3 years ago. Stone Harbor Holdings is me. I am the chairman of the board. Donna Whitaker made a sound like a balloon deflating. She slumped back in her chair, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. She realized, finally and fully, that she had spent the last hour lecturing the owner of the company about corporate culture. Evan stared at me. He looked like he had been hit by a truck. You own where I work, Brielle whispered. You are my boss. Technically, I am your boss's boss's boss, I corrected. And as of this morning, you are suspended pending an investigation into expense fraud and workplace harassment. Evan stood up. He pushed his chair back. He looked at Brielle, then at the papers, then at me. You knew? Evan asked Brielle. You knew she was the owner. I found out at the party, Brielle sobbed. Mr. Vance told me. I tried to tell you. Evan, I tried to fix it. You didn't try to fix it, Evan said, his voice shaking with a rage I had never heard from him before. You tried to cover it up. You sent that email this morning claiming she threatened you. You tried to get my sister fired from her own company to save your skin." "I was scared," Brielle screamed. "She was going to ruin everything, Evan. Look at her. She lied to us for years. She pretended to be poor. She tricked us." "I never said I was poor," I said quietly. "I just never told you I was rich. There is a difference. And the fact that you treated me like garbage when you thought I had nothing tells me everything I need to know about your character." I turned to my parents. They were still in shock, processing the reality that their struggling daughter was likely the wealthiest person they had ever met. "Mom, Dad," I said, softening my voice, "I am sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I wanted to make it on my own. I didn't want the money to change us." My father stammered, "We always worried about you. We thought you were scraping by. We kept telling you to be more like Evan." He looked at Evan, who was staring at the engagement ring on Brielle's finger with a look of nausea. "I am sorry. Alyssa," my mother said, tears streaming down her face. "We didn't see you. We were so busy looking at the surface. We didn't see what you were building. We should have asked. We should have known." "It is okay, Mom," I said. "You know now." I looked back at Evan. This was the moment. The data was on the table. The emotion was stripped away. "Evan," I said, "I am not telling you what to do. You are a grown man. If you want to marry her, I will step aside. I will sell my shares if I have to. I will not be the reason you are unhappy, but I will not let her, or her family, use the stone name to steal, to bully, or to climb ladders they didn't earn. I will not let them disrespect our family." Evan looked at Brielle. She was a mess of running mascara and panicked gasps. She reached for him. "Evan, baby, please," she begged. "It is just a job. We can go somewhere else. We love each other." Evan pulled his hand away. He looked at her like she was a stranger. "You called my sister poor," Evan said. "You made her stand in the corner at our party. You used my company credit card to buy tickets for your parents. You stole credit from your team." He took a deep breath. "I fell in love with someone who was kind," Evan said. "I fell in love with someone who was driven, but you are not driven. Brielle, you are just hungry, and you are cruel." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his car keys. "I can't do this," Evan said. "I can't marry you." "No," Brielle screamed. She stood up, knocking her chair over. "You can't do this to me. My parents are here. The invitations are sent." "Cancel them," Evan said. His voice was dead. "I am done." "Evan, wait," Donna said, standing up. "Let us be reasonable. This is just a family spat. We can—" "You should be worried about your own job." "Donna?" I cut in. "HR is reviewing your husband's vendor contracts as we speak. I suggest you leave. Now." Donna looked at me. She looked at the power in my eyes. She grabbed Robert by the arm. "Come on," she hissed. "We are leaving." "But Brielle," Robert started. "She can find her own ride," Donna snapped. She was saving herself. The rats were fleeing the ship. They walked out of the boardroom without looking back at their daughter. Brielle stood there, alone. She looked at Evan, but he had turned his back to her, looking out the window at the dark city. She looked at me. "I hate you," she whispered. "You ruined my life." "You ruined your own life." "Brielle," I said. "I just turned on the lights." She grabbed her purse and ran out of the room. We heard her heels clicking down the hallway, fast and erratic, until the elevator doors dinged and took her away. The room was quiet again. My parents were holding hands, looking at me with a mixture of awe and guilt. Evan was leaning his forehead against the cold glass of the window. I walked over to him. I put a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, then leaned into me. He was shaking. "I am sorry, Evan," I said. He turned around. His eyes were red. "Don't be," he said. His voice was thick. "You saved me. It hurts like hell. But you saved me." He looked at the empty chair where Brielle had sat. "I just feel so stupid," he said. "I thought she was the prize. I thought I was the lucky one." You are the lucky one, I said. You have a family that loves you enough to tell you the truth, even when it hurts. And you have a sister who can get you a really good discount on a venue for your next party. He managed a weak, watery smile. Can we go? He asked. I don't want to be in this building anymore. Yeah, I said. Let's go get dinner. My treat. I should hope so, my father said. Standing up, his voice was shaky, but there was a hint of a smile. Since you apparently own the whole city. We walked to the elevator together. I wasn't walking behind them anymore. I wasn't walking in the shadows. I was walking beside them. And for the first time in my life, I felt like they were actually seeing me, not the waitress, not the admin, but Alyssa Stone, the woman who held the keys. The boardroom on Monday morning felt different than it had the night before. Sunday night had been emotional. It was a family intervention held in a corporate space, but Monday was pure business. The air conditioning was humming at 68 degrees. The blinds were drawn against the morning sun, and the members of the executive committee of Larkwell Strategies Group sat in their leather chairs, looking at the dossier I had prepared. I stood at the head of the table. I was not wearing the navy dress from the party, nor the charcoal suit from the day before. I was wearing a white blazer, clean, sharp, and clinical. I wasn't there to be the aggrieved sister-in-law. I was there as the majority shareholder protecting her asset. The agenda today is singular, I began, my voice steady. We are reviewing a breach of internal compliance that extends across 3 departments: logistics, client relations, and human resources. I did not mention the engagement party. I did not mention the poor people ruin the vibe comment. I did not mention my feelings. The board did not care about feelings. They cared about liability. If you turn to page 4, I said, pointing to the screen, you will see the audit of the Project Horizon pitch. Julian Vance, the COO, leaned forward, putting on his reading glasses. This is the pitch we just won, the one Brielle Whitaker led. The one she claimed to lead, I corrected. Our internal metadata shows that the predictive models were built entirely by a junior analyst named Kevin. Brielle's only contribution was changing the title slide and, crucially, altering the risk projection numbers on slide 12. Altering them, Julian asked, his voice sharpening. She reduced the estimated volatility by 15% to make the graph look prettier, I explained. She didn't run a new model. She just typed in a lower number. If we had proceeded with the client based on that lie, and the market turned, Larkwell would have been sued for gross negligence. We would be looking at a lawsuit in the range of $5 million. The room went deadly silent. This was the twist that killed her. Being mean to the receptionist was bad. Stealing credit was unethical, but exposing the firm to a $5 million liability because she wanted a cleaner slide that was a capital offense in the corporate world. Furthermore, I continued, pressing the advantage, we discovered that when the discrepancy was initially flagged by the system, Brielle drafted a memo blaming the error on the junior analyst, Kevin. She was preparing to fire him to cover her tracks. Julian took off his glasses and threw them onto the table. She was going to frame a kid for her own fraud. Yes, I said. And her aunt in HR, Sarah Whitaker, had already prepared the termination paperwork for Kevin, without a formal review. I closed the folder. This is not a personality conflict, I concluded. This is a systemic cancer. The Whitaker family has treated Larkwell not as an employer, but as a personal fiefdom. They trade favors, they fudge numbers, and they crush anyone who threatens their comfort. It ends today. The vote was unanimous. It took less than 3 minutes. When the meeting adjourned, I went back to my temporary office. Patricia from HR came in an hour later. She looked exhausted but satisfied. It is done, Patricia said. Brielle has been terminated for cause. Sarah has been terminated for cause. Robert Well, since his offenses were mostly minor expense account padding, we are letting him retire early with a reduced pension to avoid a ageism lawsuit, but he is out. How did they take it? I asked, looking out the window. Sarah threatened to sue, Patricia said, until I showed her the email evidence of the hiring fraud. Then she got very quiet. Brielle didn't say anything. She just cried. She asked if she could speak to you. No, I said immediately. I told her that. Patricia nodded. Oh, and there is one more thing, regarding the severance. Give it to them, I said. Patricia paused. Alyssa, you don't have to. They were terminated for cause. We don't owe them a dime. Brielle was nasty to you. Why would you sign off on a severance package? I turned around. Because, Patricia, if I send them away with nothing, I am the villain. I am the rich girl who destroyed a family because they were mean to me. They will spend the rest of their lives playing the victim. They will tell everyone I was vindictive. I walked over to the desk and signed the authorization form. But if I give them the standard 3 months of pay and outplacement services, I said, capping my pen, then I am fair. I am professional. I am the one who followed the rules even when they didn't. I don't want them to look back and hate me. I want them to look back and realize that I was better than them. That is the only revenge that lasts. That afternoon, I met Evan. He asked to meet at the lakefront, far away from the office and far away from our parents' house. It was a windy day, the gray waves of Lake Michigan crashing against the concrete steps. When I saw him, he looked 10 years older than he had 2 days ago. He was sitting on a bench, staring at the water. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing an old hoodie from his college days. I sat down next to him. We didn't speak for a long time. We just watched the waves. She called me, Evan said finally. His voice was hoarse. I assumed she would, I said. She told me that you set her up, Evan said. She said you planted the bad data in her presentation. She said you manipulated the HR files. She said you did all of it because you were jealous that she was pretty and popular and you were alone. I felt a flash of anger, but I tamped it down. And what did you say? Evan picked up a pebble and threw it into the water. I asked her one question. I asked her, did you love me? Or did you love the fact that I was easy to manage? What did she say? She didn't answer. Evan said, she just started screaming about how unfair it was that she lost her company car. He let out a short, bitter laugh. That was it. Liz, that was the moment. She just lost her fiancé, and she was crying about a lease on a Ford Explorer. He turned to look at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. I am so sorry. Alyssa, he whispered. I let her treat you like dirt. I sat there at the dinner table and let her make jokes about your clothes. I told you to dress up for the party because I was ashamed of you. God, I was so arrogant. I thought I was the big success story, the golden boy, and I looked down on you because I thought you were struggling. You were conditioned to think that way. Evan, I said gently, Mom and Dad, they always put the spotlight on you. You got used to the applause. You didn't realize that while you were on stage. I was the one building the theater. I know, he said, but that is no excuse. I should have defended you. A brother protects his sister. I failed you. You are protecting me now, I said. By walking away from her, that is enough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, the engagement ring. I called the jeweler, he said, staring at the box. They have a return policy, but there is a restocking fee. Seems fitting. I pay a penalty for a bad investment. It is a cheap price for freedom, Evan, I said. Believe me, I know about return on investment. This is the best deal you will ever make. He nodded and put the box back in his pocket. So, what now? Do I have to quit my job, I mean? My sister is the owner. It is kind of weird. You are good at your job, Evan, I said. You earned your spot. Stay, work hard. Just maybe don't date anyone from the client relations department for a while. He laughed. It was a real laugh this time. Deal. The healing with my parents took longer, but it went deeper. A week after the dust settled, they asked to visit my office. Not the Larkwell office, they were still too intimidated by that, but my office at Stone Harbor Holdings, the small, quiet space where I had built my empire. They walked in tentatively. My father looked at the wall of filing cabinets. He looked at the map of Chicago with pins marking all the properties I owned. There were 32 pins. "You bought the first one when you were 19, my father asked, tracing a finger over the map. "That old place in Edgewater." "Yeah," I said. "I fixed the toilet myself." My father turned to me. There was a look in his eyes I had never seen before. It wasn't the beaming, loud pride he had for Evan. It was a quiet, reverent respect. "I told you to sell it," he said softly. "I told you it was a mistake. I said you were a girl playing house." "I know, Dad. I was wrong," he said. "You were smarter than all of us. You were tougher than all of us." My mother was looking at a photo on my desk. It was a picture of me standing in front of my first commercial building, wearing jeans and a hard hat, covered in dust. "You never asked for help," my mother said. "We gave Evan money for his down payment. We gave him money for his car. You never asked for a penny." "I didn't need it," I said. "That makes it worse," she said, wiping her eyes. "We ignored you because you were strong. We punished you for being capable. I am so sorry. Alyssa." "It is okay," I said, and for the first time, I really meant it. "I am just glad you are here now." We ended the saga not with a bang, but with a meal. 2 weeks after the wedding that never was, we gathered at my house. I cooked. I made lasagna messy, cheesy, comfort food. There were no place cards. There was no dress code. I wore leggings and an oversized sweater. Evan wore a t-shirt. We sat around my kitchen table. There was no talk of vibes. There was no one checking the lighting for a photo. There was no one bragging about their job title or their connections. We just ate. We talked about the weather. We talked about the Chicago Bears. We talked about nothing and everything. At one point, Evan spilled a little bit of red wine on the tablecloth. He froze, a reflex from his time with Brielle, expecting to be scolded for ruining the aesthetic. "Oops," he said, looking at me nervously. I grabbed the salt shaker and dumped a pile of salt on the spill. "It will come out," I said, taking a bite of garlic bread. "It is just a tablecloth, Evan. It is meant to be used." He relaxed. He smiled. "Right. It is just a tablecloth." It was a small moment, but it felt like a victory. We were deprogramming ourselves. We were learning that value wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. The next morning, I walked out of the Larkwell building after a meeting with the new interim management team. It was a crisp autumn day in Chicago. The wind was whipping off the lake, sharp and cold. I buttoned my coat, a simple, warm wool coat that Brielle would have probably called frumpy. I stopped on the sidewalk and looked up at the building. It was 70 stories of steel and glass, reflecting the clouds. It was a monument to ambition. For a long time, I had looked at that building and felt like an imposter. I had felt like the girl who was just pretending. The girl who was hiding behind LLCs and silence because she was afraid that if she stepped into the light, she would be told she didn't belong. But as I stood there, watching the employees stream out for lunch, I realized something. I hadn't hidden because I was weak. I had hidden because I was building a foundation. And while Brielle and people like her were busy decorating the penthouse, I had been down in the basement, pouring the concrete that held the whole thing up. I took a deep breath of the cold air. It tasted like metal and rain. It tasted like ownership. I wasn't the admin. I wasn't the waitress. I wasn't the poor relation. My name is Alyssa Stone. I own the building. I own my narrative. And for the first time in my life, I was perfectly happy to be exactly who I was, standing right in the center of the frame. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed seeing Alyssa take back her power and put the toxic in-laws in their place, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from and what you thought of that final boardroom takedown. Don't forget to subscribe to Juliet Revenge Stories for more satisfying dramas. Hit that like button to support the channel, and smash the hype button so this story can reach even more people. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next story.